Hello, friends, and welcome back to the Jank Tank, episode number 38. My name is Timothy Zaccanino. I'm going to be your unfortunately sick host today, but I'm here with two really healthy guys, Christopher Sofsky, Teld. Gentlemen, I have a proposition for you. I think while we're recording this episode, we should speak half as fast as normal. That way, the listeners can listen at max speed.
Oh, God damn it, Tim. You always manage to outdo yourself.
I will allow this if we can start playing our cube matches on motorcycles. We can truly embrace the card game on motorcycles meme.
Isn't that a whole arc of Yu-Gi-Oh?
It is. It is a whole arc of Yu-Gi-Oh. We're just living the Yu-Gi-Oh Hearthstone dream now.
Man, Aetherdrift. I'm just gonna go ahead and get my sentiment out of the way at the very beginning. I am not into this set at all, but
yeah.
Thankfully, we're talking cube cards and not set aesthetics or anything like that, so there will be plenty of good stuff to talk about here. But man, Aetherdrift is a swing and a miss for me. But I guess we should hold off on that. And
yeah, let's bitch about that after we get through the cards. But yes, I agree with you 100%. They try to do way too much here, and they failed pretty bad in my opinion.
Vroom vroom, zoom zoom.
The sharks are. I like the sharks.
Yeah, no, the shark people are sweet.
The fish, yeah. There's like a assassin stingray fish guy or something. Like there's some neat stuff in here, as there always is. But the overall theme of goofy death race ain't doing it for me, folks.
Well, remember, it's only a death race if you die.
Yeah. So race set doesn't quite hit the same, does it? Let's go ahead and get the usual obligatory stuff out of the way. Remember, the best way to support Jank Diver Gaming and the Jank Tank podcast is to join our Discord server, draft with us, give us your feedback. It's a great place to hang out with like-minded individuals, talk about Cube, Retail Limited, all things Magic. You can find links to our Discord server wherever you're listening to this podcast. We host tons of scheduled drafts throughout the week, including our Peasant Cube on Saturday nights, the mainline Jank Diver Cube on Sunday nights, which is going to be the focus of today's review, and we have F&M style drafts on Fridays, where our players vote on a cube to play, as well as various guest cubes created by members of our server throughout the week. So there's always plenty to do. Check out our socials, Twitter at JankDiverGaming, YouTube.com/JankDiverGaming, and find Teld streaming occasionally on Twitch.tv/Teld Talks. We're going to skip our normal single card discussion for a longer cube review episode, and I think now's the time to let's see what adjective or what verb let's drift into the intro stuff. Like, I mean, come on, like, what am I not supposed to make puns? Look at this set.
No. Yeah, I know. This is like it's begging for you to clown on it.
Yeah. Does somebody want to kind of like just very briefly touch on what this set is, what the theme is?
This set, staying in flavor, is a train wreck or a crash. It is a complete disaster, aesthetically.
Yeah, so they decided to do like a death race kind of thing across, I think, like Avishkar, which is what we're calling Kaladesh now, I guess. It's supposed to kind of be like, because it's got that sort of steampunk aesthetic, it's kind of supposed to be like the center of it, but it's also across Amonkhet and then a plane called Muruganda that I've never heard of. Yeah, we'll save our bitching mostly for the end, but it just kind of ends up feeling like Mom a little bit, but like less epic. I don't know why they couldn't just confine this to Avishkar. It would make way more sense.
I wouldn't have even minded if they had done like two sets, if it had been like, all right, the race starts on Kaladesh and ends on Amonkhet or something. Because like,
right,
actually,
yeah, that would be cool.
I think that could have worked. But like, the problem too is that Muruganda, for those who are at home, is the plane that is vanilla. Everything is a vanilla, right? Everything is vanilla matters. So that's why there's a cycle at Uncommon of vanilla creatures that are legends in this set.
Okay.
But there's nothing you can actually do with that set. So like, in order to have it in a Magic the Gathering set, it basically has to be a cameo. And so that is my understanding of why we had to have three planes, is we wanted to feature Muruganda because people have been asking for it, apparently. I assume that people are asking for it.
Is that why there's like several just giant dumb creatures for their mana cost? What?
That is the case, yes.
That's why there's like the 3 mana dinosaur that pumps other dinos. It's why the vanillas are there.
Yeah,
Okay,
it's supposed to be very generic effects. I also don't tend to like these sets that have a super mechanic through them. So like, I didn't like Kaldheim's snow mechanic. I didn't really like the Tempted by the Ring very much. And I continue to not like speed, which is this kit mechanic. Like, I'm calling it a super mechanic as like a named mechanic that works throughout the set. And oftentimes these are mechanics that like reference other things outside the game. So speed references like a speed counter, which is like not as convoluted as the ring, but still just kind of tedious. But I just find these sort of sets tend to be a little, I don't know, it warps the whole format when you play retail limited around these like super mechanics. I think they tend not to be as much fun as maybe the designers expect them to be. But that's also could just be my personal preference.
Well, isn't it also kind of theoretically the case that if your super mechanic basically incentivizes you to do damage to your opponent every turn, that like the format's just going to be super aggressive, or like you're supposed to be super aggressive?
Maybe. I think you're definitely supposed to be tempo oriented, but that's just modern retail limited. Like Duskmorn was a set where you could play 3-color suit pretty reliably, but you still had to get on board super early and play to the board. So that's just modern Magic.
We should talk, maybe not too in depth, but we should spend a little bit of time on Start Your Engines. But I normally I would spend time talking about the return in mechanics, but the return in mechanics from the set are literally vehicles and mounts and cycle, and there's no twist on them. So there's nothing we really have to talk about for any return in mechanics that people don't already know. And the only two new mechanics are Start Your Engines and Exhaust. Just to knock out Exhaust, this is an activated ability that you can only use once. It seems like it's mostly on like vehicles to turn them into permanent creatures, but this is just the monstrosity mechanic from Theros. But the output for activating an exhaust ability can be something other than +1/+1 counters. So it's not even really a new mechanic. It's just a twist on an old mechanic. Probably worth noting that blinking an exhausted permanent allows you to then activate the exhaust ability again, but I don't know how often that's going to come up. I don't even know how many exhaust cards we're going to talk about, but we will talk about Start Your Engines cards. And this is one of those ones where it's like, there's a lot of convoluted stuff going on, and you'll have to probably play it once or twice to kind of get the full feel of it. But just to kind of like pace it out, whenever a permanent enters with the Start Your Engines ability, you go to 1 speed. And speed is just something you track on the side, like being the Monarch or energy counters or whatever. Whenever your opponent loses life, for the first time during your turn, you increase your speed by 1. And that can happen on the first turn that you get speed as well. So you can get speed, hit your opponent, and go to 2 speed during the same turn, but you cannot go to 3 speed that same turn. And it only happens during your turn, so you can't ping your opponent on their turn to increase your speed either. And then there will be cards that reference max speed, which is 4. So once you hit 4 speed, you can no longer gain any speed, and there's only one card in the set that is not cubable that can reduce speed. So your goal is to play a Start Your Engines card, have a consistent source of damage to get up to 4 speed, and then unlock your max speed abilities. We will talk about speed cards today. So I think it's worth talking about kind of maybe the patterns or what we expect out of this. It is a little weird that a mechanic called speed takes 3 turns to get going. It's just a little bit strange. But the note I wanted to make here is that speed is not as parasitic as something like Tempted by the Ring or Venture into the Dungeon, right? Those are mechanics that need to be supported by a lot of cards with that text on them. Technically, you could play a single card that says Start Your Engines in your entire cube, and it works on its own, because playing additional cards that say Start Your Engines don't actually do anything. It's not like it levels up your speed when you play another Start Your Engines card. So once you've started your engines, you can basically erase the Start Your Engines text on every other card, which is a little bit weird too. From a cube perspective, this mechanic just does not work on expensive creatures. If your only speed card in your entire cube is a 5-drop, you're just never going to get max speed, because you're talking, turn 8 at the earliest?
Well, we're going to be talking about Speed Demon that has a sort of escalating effect based on your current speed. It doesn't require you to get max speed.
That's probably the one playable expensive card that has speed involved. I was just going to say, I also think this is a mechanic that your card just has to be playable on its own, because I don't think you're going to reliably be able to get max speed. If you don't, even the cheap cards, if you don't play them on curve, if you draw them later in the game, you can't reliably hit max speed, and games are over faster and faster in Magic these days. So I think there's a couple of speed cards we're going to be interested in, but it's mostly just because the card itself is pretty good, and if you hit max speed, it's kind of like a gravy bonus that you get.
Yeah, 100%. Like speed to Tim's point, like it isn't necessarily parasitic, but it's sort of sneaky parasitic insofar as, like, if you're playing cards with sort of speed benefits, like in Constructed, you're going to want a ton of them because you're going to want to get your speed counter going like immediately with like a 1-drop, right? Like immediately you're going to want to get it started. So yeah, to Teld's point, like if there were a bunch of really good speed cards, I think I'd be a little concerned because the fact of the matter is that speed is kind of inherently snowball-y. Like the earlier you get it online, the better it's going to be over the course of the game. But if you draw it later in the game, you might not get to max speed. So like Teld said, I don't think in a cube environment, because there's only one set of these, you're not going to be able to have like a speed theme in your cube. It's just not going to happen. So, I mean, flavorful, not super compelling for cube.
One final note I wanted to make on speed, actually, before we start off white section, is fetch lands. If you have speed cards in your cube and you're playing with fetch lands as well, you have to crack those fetch lands on your own turn, right? If you crack them during your opponent's turn and they haven't increased their speed yet, you'll actually increase their speed for them. So the whole like end step crack fetch whatever could actually backfire against speed. So just play around speed cards with your fetch lands is all I'm saying. White has, we actually picked out quite a bit from this set to talk about. There's enough individual power packed into these cards here. And the first one's actually just a continued sign that the FBI agent is listening. We spent a lot of time last year talking about Savannah Lions and how they don't stack up. And I think Kellen from Foundations did a good job of, indicating that R&D wants better Savannah Lions. And this Bossry card is probably on par with that. It's probably a little bit worse than Kellen, but Bossry, Tomorrow's Champion, is going to be our first card today. It's a single white mana for a 2/1 human knight. You can pay white, tap it, and exert it to make a 1/1 cat with lifelink, and exert means it won't untap during its controller's next untap step. It also has cycling for 2 and a white, and some basically useless text. When you cycle it, cats you control gain hexproof and indestructible until end of turn for whatever reason. I don't know that Bassery was ever established as the cat guy, but I don't. It's a little bit weird. 1 mana 2/1, you can exert to make 1/1 lifelinkers. I don't really put a lot of stock in cycling on this. Once you get to like 3 mana cycling, you're talking about like almost a whole turn's worth of mana. So it's like
it's expensive.
It's a buyout, but it's not a great buyout. So we're really talking about Savannah Lions that can occasionally pump out 1/1 lifelinkers. Where are we at on that?
I think that this is a fine card. It's obviously not apples to apples comparable to Usher, but I mean it has different play patterns. But what I do like about the patterns on this is that I don't have to jam my Usher into combat and probably sacrifice it or trade off to get the token. I wish the cycling was cheaper. I think that cycling on a Savannah Lions as a concept is way more interesting than pumping out the occasional 1/1 token, but both of these are nods to being a Savannah Lions that you can get some kind of utility out of later in the game, which is what Savannah Lions need now. To your point, cycling 3 is a lot. Like, if you draw this and you're on 5 mana and you cycle it, if you draw a 3-drop, you're not playing it that turn. But there are probably going to be moments where, like, you top this and then, like, you're on 5 mana because it's later in the game, and then you cycle it and you, like, cycle into your Blood Artist effect that makes your attack really good all of a sudden, or cycle into your, deck in stone to remove their best creature and open up a good attack or something. I don't think it's nothing. It is a little pricey, though. But on the other hand, to be fair, if they just gave us a Savannah Lions that, like, cycled for 1, that would probably be too good. Well, not too good. Like, it wouldn't be environment breaking, but it would just be kind of like free to put in your deck as a 1-drop.
Yeah, I misread this card when we first spoiled it, and I thought it was great. I saw the word C right after when you cycle this card and skipped to hexproof and indestructible, and my mind filled in the blank as creatures, and I thought this was going to be great. I was like, all right, cool, we got like heroic reinforcement or heroic intervention on a Savannah Lion, like game. As it
that
is,
would
like,
be kind of nuts.
That would be kind of nuts. I think as it is, like, that effect's probably not going to come up super often in Constructed or Cube. I'm sure this card is unfortunately going to be very expensive because of the cat enjoyers, the Arabo gamers in Commander, where this card will be just, actually protect your board.
Is the joke here that, like, in Constructed, the second copy or third copy of Bossry, like,
protects the cat you made?
Because it's legendary, you can't run it out, so it gives you... That just seems so... How many cats are you going to make? Like, 1?
Yeah.
2?
I'm trying to avoid the Commander brain rot, because that's where my brain was actually about to start talking about. But in the context of Cube, I still think, like, this is probably okay, but I don't actually think this card is... Having not played it, I don't think this card is meaningfully better than Usher of the Fallen. I think that Usher is going to frequently be better because it pushes through damage while also making a token, which Basri can't do unless you can give it Vigilance or untap it. That being said, Basri can safely make tokens, so once you're in a position where the board's stalling a little bit, maybe you're trying to build up for an Anthem turn, or you get a War Leader's Helix or something, or a War Leader's Call in play. It could be better, but like Exert is a pretty meaningful downside. That's every other turn, so you're not, you're just like you said, you're making like what, 2 or 3 tokens off this in the course of a game if you played on turn 1?
Probably not even 3, honestly, because it also costs mana. It costs a white mana to activate it. You know that 2-drop Steward of Solidarity? It's like 2 mana, 2/2, tap Exert, make a 1/1 with Vigilance. And the more I read this, the more I'm not even convinced that Basri's better than that. Because that doesn't cost mana to activate. It's 2 mana, 2/2 instead of 1 mana, 2/1. Cycling is something, but at 3 mana, it's not that much of an addition. So, I don't know. I'm coming down on Basri as I read it a little bit. Exert is just so slow. You're talking like a 1/1 every 2 turns for the cost of extra mana. It's not pushed.
Can I interest you in the line of Exert Basri to make a token, and then you target it with Cerulean Wisp to untap it and make another token?
Uninterested.
I think where the ability is going to shine is in white decks that have incorporated like Anthem effects or like you already mentioned like War Leader's Call, and I think it'll also be in a nice little piece of utility in your white aggressive decks that feature some kind of Blood Artistry stuff, maybe a little bit of sacrifice synergy just to be able to occasionally just make a body to feed to something.
This card's actually really good with Virtue of Loyalty as well.
Yeah, it is, but Virtue.
Granted, that might be more that Virtue of Loyalty is. This is like the Monstrous Rage thing. This card's good with Monstrous Rage, but Monstrous Rage is the broken card, right? Or Virtue of Loyalty is the messed up card.
Are we going to say that with every like saddle creature and vehicle as well?
Yeah.
Speaking of which.
Teld, why don't you go ahead and read this one, because I think you're more excited about it than I am.
Yeah, so Bulwark Ox is 1 and a white for a 2/2 Ox mount. Whenever it attacks while saddled, you place a +1/+1 counter on target creature. It has saddle 1, and then you can sacrifice this creature. Creatures you control with counters on them gain hexproof and indestructible until end of turn. So I am interested in this card because it is some cool roll compression. It does the sort of counters snowball-y thing, while also being a board protection effect that kind of enables itself. And I think that's decent. My concern with this card is that the 2 cards it's roll compressing in, which are Selfless Spirit and Luminarch Aspirant, are both just much better than this card. So you would have to find, I think, a 3rd slot, because while this card does both of those things, it does them poorly.
Yeah, I think this is worth a test. Being able to just tap a token every turn to put a +1/+1 counter on something. And bear in mind, you can, the first couple times you could put a token on this or a counter on this to make it like large enough to keep attacking, which is I think what you're probably supposed to do.
I think first counter's probably most of the time going on this to make it a 3/3. That's usually enough to have to like force a trade with something.
Yeah, 100%. So this strikes me as potentially okay. I think where it's, at least in our cube, where it's probably going to be maximized is in green-white, because green has a bunch of cards that either put counters on themselves or other things, and that's when that sacrifice mode is going to start to get good. We'll see. It's a cool design. It's a cool design, and I think there's probably enough power here for it to be a worthwhile test. This doesn't strike me as any kind of like all-timer thing, though.
No. This card, but I do like cards that sort of signal this +1/+1 counter theming without being just explicitly tailored to those cards, and this kind of does that.
And they're just puts +1/+1 counters on stuff on enough cards that we're getting to the point where in a lot of like white and also green kind of proactive, like leaning towards aggressive decks, like you don't need to support a +1/+1 counter theme for cards that like happen to be pretty solid and also sort of care about +1/+1 counters incidentally to be like good includes. Like we keep joking about it, but Bloated Contaminator, which is the 3 mana 4/4 trample with toxic, and when it does damage you proliferate. Like the proliferate's actually becoming relevant text on the card. So yeah, we're sort of getting there on that. I'd like to take this next one just because I have a soft spot for the Sunmare. Back like I guess what we call like Arena constructed when it was still in beta, we had like Kaladesh, Amonkhet, and Ixalan. That's all we had. And I built a Crested Sunmare deck. Crested Sunmare is a 5-drop, 5/5 that when you gain like a certain amount of life in a turn, it spits out like another giant horse that is indestructible as long as you have the Sunmare out. So the deck was the white lifelink cat that embalms, the Anointer Priest that embalms and gains life when you make tokens, and Anointed Procession, which just doubles all the tokens that you make, and I would crash the client by like embalming Anointer priests that would trigger the other Anointer priests that would make more tokens. So I have a soft spot for this card. But anyway, the card itself, Guardian Sunmare. I like the art on this. It's a little too polished. It's a little too digital. It is a 5-mana 5/5 with Ward 2, Horse Mount. Whenever this creature attacks while saddled, search your library for a non-land permanent card with mana value 3 or less, put it onto the battlefield, then shuffle, and it has Saddle 4. So white has a good amount of like artifact and enchantment-based removal. So you could like saddle this, attack with it, go get your Journey to Nowhere, remove the thing that was big enough to block this, and kind of get your ball rolling. Ward 2 is a lot better on cheaper creatures that sort of like force your opponent to trade down on mana. It does mitigate how expensive and Baneslayer this card is. My main issue with this card is like, it is very Baneslayer, which tend to be sort of like feast or famine play patterns, but also Saddle 4 is not free at all, and if you're playing this after a board wipe, for example, like you're pretty much playing a 5-mana 5/5 Ward 2, and against a control deck, if they just counter or remove what comes down next, like it's just a 5/5. Yeah. This is a cool card. I think that you have... If you're doing like generally powerful cube card stuff, Avacyn I think is much. I mean, and we're not comparing mechanically similar cards. I think Avacyn is way stronger than this. I know the general for you guys, you may not agree with this, but I think if you're doing like general creaturey go wide white stuff in your cube, I think Angel of Invention is probably better than this.
Not sure about that. I mean, I don't know. Like, I've got a soft spot for this card too. I think some of the things you can do with it are pretty powerful. There's obviously you can go get like a wedding announcement or a cryptic coat that are kind of engine-y game plans in and of themselves. There's a few 3-mana walkers you can go get. But then I think one of the more powerful things you can do with this is you can turn it into a Stonehewer Giant and go get a Maul of the Skyclave or a Celestial Armor. And if you put that on this card, suddenly you have like a 7-power flyer that like tutored its own equipment, which is pretty cool. But I mean, I think that's really cool. I think for cube, this is probably just the 5-drop slot is too competitive for something that's cube.
Yeah.
I will say,
I thought this was a mythic. This reads like a mythic to me as far as like being able to tutor straight to the battlefield is just not something they print very often. So like the text box is really strong, but Saddle 4, like you said, Saddle 4 is not free at all. And white especially just doesn't have a lot of 4-power creatures or 4-power plus creatures. So you're usually talking tapping multiple creatures to get this going. War 2 helps it against removal, but doesn't protect it in combat in any way. So.
I think this card would be really cool in lower power environments where like the removal's a little less efficient and you've got like maybe some fiddly synergy engines that you're trying to put together. I think it'll be really cool there.
Yeah, I think where this card would maybe interest me the most is if we were curating some kind of like lower power, like heavily themed cube with like an enchantress type thing, because if you have a lot of enchantments in your cube that do interesting utility things, like the range of targets you can tutor for gets more interesting. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I think for a generic power fair cube, I think that this is probably on the lower end of what you could be looking at.
What do you think this card needed to be like a shoe-in?
Vigilance.
Vig, yeah.
Put vigilance on this, and I'm a lot higher on it. Even though mechanically it doesn't actually change much. Like, well, it's specifically vigilance because you have to tap so much to do Saddle 4 that when you swing with this, you're opening yourself up to a lot of attacks.
Mm-hmm. But you get to fetch either a creature or a Banishing Light or something. So like it mitigates that already with its ability. So I don't think vigilance is necessarily like
I think I would actually like it if it was a slightly smaller creature and it costs less mana.
Well, that'd be a totally different card. I think
if it was like a 4-mana 4/4. Yeah, if we're just adding something, maybe vigilance. I don't know. I think we should move on, but I think even if this card was like a little bit more tuned up, my problem with it, and this doesn't necessarily mean it has to be a problem for the listeners' cube design goals, but this kind of has Bone Horde Dracosaur vibes to me, where Bone Horde Dracosaur is way more powerful than this, by the way, like way more powerful than this. But it's like, okay, here's my thing. If you let me do my thing, you're gonna lose, and if you remove it, then the game just gets reset. Like it's like kill it or lose.
The real problem with this card, actually, now that I'm thinking about it, is it's on the same spot in the curve as Shadowfax. So you can't curve your Shadowfax into your Guardian Sunmare saddle with Shadowfax, give it haste and attack.
But Shadowfax gives this haste and cruise it.
It does, but they're on the same spot in the curve. Like we need to alchemy buff Shadowfax into a 4-drop. That's what we need to do.
Saddling a horse is giving me like a really unsettling mental image that I'm not going to elaborate on.
To the listener, let me tell you about these guys real quick. So I painstakingly laid out every single card in this document by mana value, and then these jackholes come in with their last minute cards and just like throw them in wherever. So we're gonna go back to 2-drops real quick.
Yay!
All right, these cards this is the speed round. We're just blazing through these cards.
And Teld, I do think it is good to note these cards. I left them off because we don't have much to say as far as cube worthiness, but they are notable cards.
Yeah, so the first one is Glory Heath Links. It's a 1 and a white for a 2/3 with lifelink cat mount, so you can protect it with Basri. And whenever it attacks while saddled, it has saddle 2. Search your library for a basic plains card, reveal it, and put it into your hand, then shuffle. All right, we're gonna talk this card a lot in the peasant episode, but like, what are the uncommons these days? Like,
I don't know. They're really pushing shit.
This is a rare from like 5 years ago.
I would like the art on this card too. This is like given the theme, I think that they did a pretty bad job actually of doing enough arts that really conveyed a sense of speed, and I think this art does a very good job of making you feel like you're watching a race.
This is just a rock solid uncommon. Like, you could put this in your regular cube, and I think I would be like, okay, well, I don't know if it's good, but like, it's probably fine. And the other one is my rant for the day, and I'm sure you guys are gonna jump in on this, but it's Sundial Dawn Tyrant, 1 and a white for a 3/3 legendary artifact creature construct.
They printed Centaur Courser at 2 mana.
Yeah, I guess we're just not getting our 1 mana 3/1 anytime soon. This is like a signal for that, right?
This isn't an indictment of Sundial. It's more of a what we didn't get. And as the Twitter responded to Sundial, we were not the only ones anticipated on 1 mana 3/1. Seems like that's what everybody assumed the white vanilla was going to be. And you notice they saved this one for last.
Yeah, it was supposed to be the big hyped one. We got super hyped because once they didn't reveal it, it was like, all right, we're getting the 1 mana 3/1, right?
I was like, is it going to be a 3/2?
Yeah.
So yeah, Sundial is like fine. We're probably going to talk about it for Peasant Cube, but this really could have been an opportunity for the 1 mana 3/1, which I don't think would break a constructed format, but what do I know?
Okay, up next we've got a. Actually, this is a very cool design. To hand it to the set, there are a couple of like really cool designs in the set. This one is Voyager Glide Car. I'm not really sure what the hell's going on in the art.
It looks like a Halo gun.
It kind of does. Yeah, this is one where I'd have to like expand the art and be like, oh, that's what's supposed to be happening. Mm-hmm. Anyway, this is a very cool take on a white 1-drop. It is 1 white mana for a 2/3 artifact vehicle at rare. When it ETBs, you scry 1, and then if you tap 3 other untapped creatures you control until end of turn, this vehicle becomes an artifact creature and gains flying, and you put a +1/+1 counter on it, and it also has crew.
Crew 1.
Yeah, crew 1. Opening the game and scrying 1 is kind of nice, especially if you kept like a shaky hand. So that's thing number 1. Any token that you make or any creature that you play that has Summoning Sickness, which is going to be most of them in white, you can just tap it, and effectively you have a slightly bigger Isamaru that you paid 1 mana for and already scryed. And then later in the game, if you're playing like a tokensy deck, especially if you're playing cards like Blade Splicer or Sanguine Evangelist or something that put multiple bodies onto the battlefield at the same time that can't attack yet, being able to just lob this increasingly large flyer at your opponent that you made for 1 mana seems pretty strong. This seems good to me.
Yeah. Couple notable things that I don't know how much this will come up in our cube, but especially in cubes with their less removal dens. This effect to tap 3 creatures and put a +1 counter on this is not sorcery speed, and it is not limited to once per turn. So if you've got 6 creatures in play, you can tap 6 creatures and put 2 +1/+1 counters on this thing.
Oh, that's a good note. Yeah. The point I like about this is how it shapes up your hand in your opener. I'm basically calling this Once Upon a Time, because if it's in your opening hand, the scry 1 just means that you usually will have a functional start, especially if you're starting with this on 1. I do want to just note on vehicles in general, because a couple more will come up. Like, no matter how good a vehicle looks, you always have to like step them back like just a notch, because crewing them is a cost. Even crew 1, which is the like acceptable cost for most things, like crewing them is a cost, and it can play into some of the weaknesses of like a white weenie deck or something like that. You think of vehicles being resilient to board wipes because they stick around, but they're also terrible top decks after a board wipe usually. So
that's true.
They kind of play into strengths and weaknesses in different ways. So like I wouldn't want to add like 10 vehicles to a cube necessarily if there were 10 playable vehicles. So I always take them back like just a notch. If this card looks like an 8 to me, I assume it plays out like a 7. Like there are going to be times where you just don't get to do the thing. But I do like this is a nice little package of abilities and stats for a 1-drop.
Yeah, this feels like it's got the nice combination of pretty good floor and pretty good ceiling without being obviously completely broken on either of those.
Yeah. I already know Teld's opinion, and I assume I know Chris's opinion. Are you pro loot or anti loot?
I don't know. I was thinking about it a lot less before Teld sort of pointed out what they're doing here. It's not a compelling character to me at all. I mean, I'll leave it at that.
So you're in the middle. I do not like loot, and Teld, I'm assuming you don't like loot at all.
I'm very anti-loot. I mean, we could put loot in a box and just, that way. I assume that's what we're gonna do at some point is have loot as a box topper, so that when you search loot box MTG, you get that instead. Yeah,
you put him in a crate, make a loot crate. I only mention this because he's gonna come up on like 15 arts this set, but
loot is an obvious and then I rarely dump into this, but loot is just one of those like super obviously cynical. I'm trying to sell plushies / create a Baby Yoda mascot type character, and it's just like whatever. You could have done it with Fibblethip because people actually like Fibblethip.
All right, so loot in the loot crate. So we've got an artifact here, Perilous Snare. It's 2 and a white for a rare artifact. It has, drumroll, start your engines, and when this artifact enters, exile target non-land permanent an opponent controls until this artifact leaves the battlefield. The max speed bonus lets you tap the Perilous Snare to put a +1 counter on target creature or vehicle you control at sorcery speed. So if we ignore start your engines for just a moment, this is like Banish and Light, basically on an artifact instead of an enchantment. It hits any non-land permanent, so it can grab planeswalkers, so on and so forth. Banish and Light, a little bit weak by today's standards, but still functional, I think, if you just need kind of like a catch-all in white. Artifact's also slightly more supported than enchantment, so that's nice. But the max speed bonus is nice. The problem being, of course, like you have to get to max speed first. But in a white aggressive deck, being able to pop your opponent's blocker, hit them, put you up to 2 max speed. Hopefully you get up to 4 max speed soon, and then you get this bonus of throwing +1/+1 counters around. I think that's a nice little addition to a Banish and Light to make me reconsider a slot like that.
I don't think you want to fire this off on 3. I think what you definitely want to be doing with this card is playing this to remove your opponent's most dangerous blocker and then jamming and get it up to speed 2 the turn that you play it. I do think that extra bonus is nice. I have a couple notes. We got rid of Banishing Light a while ago because people just weren't putting it in their decks at all, and it just kind of felt like the 2-mana removal spells were better. The value of Banishing Light fluctuates, though, because when we originally cut it, it was just like, okay, well, this removes a creature 99% of the time, and it's just expensive, and it's vulnerable to removal. As the range of permanents that you will just lose to in your cube expands, your Great Henges, your card draw engines, your Virtue of Persistences, stuff like that, all of a sudden the value of a Banishing Light starts going back up. The other thing to note, though, is I do think this being an artifact versus an enchantment is actually a significant downside because most things that remove enchantments also remove artifacts, and there are a lot more cards that just remove artifacts as well, so this is a lot more vulnerable into red and green. Specifically red. This is a lot more vulnerable into red than an enchantment is, because a red deck basically can't remove an enchantment.
Sure. Flip side of that, though, is there are a lot more cards that are commonly cubable that interact favorably with artifacts than there are enchantments. So, there's some upside and downside to this. Yeah. But I think in general, for our cube, it's probably mostly downside. Is it downside though? Because we don't run a braid, so I don't actually think we run any of the red shatters.
we don't run a lot of red shatters, so I don't think it's going to be meaningfully different. Against green, it's not going to be meaningfully different because all the green stuff that removes enchantments also removes artifacts. But just be aware if you do run a braid style effects or cards that interact with artifacts in your red section, this will be more vulnerable than Vanishing Light is.
Yep. Chris, did you add the sweeper here?
Yeah, I did. I was actually kind of surprised that it wasn't on here already. Teld, do you want to take this one?
Yeah, so this is Spectacular Pileup.
Fantastic art, by the way, which is a rarity.
How is this not a 5-color card? How is that art not reserved for a 5-color card?
I don't know.
Yeah, I kind of assumed that was 5-color art when I saw it. But it's a sorcery, and all creatures and vehicles lose indestructible until end of turn, and then destroy all creatures and vehicles with cycling 2. So I have been a notable Wrath hater for a pretty extended period of time, with kind of the sole exception of that being maybe Toxic Deluge. for reasons that we've talked about off air, but not a lot on air. I think this card is very good, and I think it's very good for a couple of main reasons. First of all, my biggest problem with Wraths is that when Wraths are good, they're like the best card in your deck, and when Wraths are bad, they're just rotting in your hand, and you don't want to cast them. When your opponent plays a Prosper, you don't want a Wrath, because then you're going to kill the Prosper, and you're going to spend 4 mana killing it, and then they're going to play a Chandra, and you're going to be stuck in the same spot. Like, against mid-range decks that can put out one meaningful threat, Wraths are kind of bad. Against aggro decks, Wraths can be good, but sometimes it's a little sketchy whether you actually need to cast or not. And Wraths are really good against green decks. And they're really bad against control decks. So in those bad matchups, having Cycling 2 on this, just being able to pitch it, just gets rid of the biggest problem that these cards have, which is the situational nature. Putting Cycling on a situational card is great. Second thing is that Tyvar Stand and to a lesser extent Selfless Spirit cause huge problems for leaning on Wraths in cube. Yeah. And you will just kind of lose to them. And this card gets around that. It gets around cards like Looter Scooter. It gets around cards like Unidentified Hovership sticking around. We're going to add a couple of vehicles from this set. So a lot of that vehicle resiliency to Wraths also gets caught up in that, while also catching a lot of the normal outs to Wraths. Downside, being a mana more expensive does mean you're going to sometimes lose the game because you couldn't cast a Wrath. You're sometimes going to lose the game because your opponent got to suddenly hold up Reprieve or Mana Tithe. So there's downside to it, but I think this is a pretty interesting card that fits that spot in between like the 4 mana Wraths that have kind of aged poorly and a card like Sunfall that is completely egregious.
I'm not actually crazy about the lose indestructible. No, I'm not in general for the card, but for our cube, because one of the things I've noticed with our white decks is like the -X Wraths that don't care about your ability to grant indestructible, like really punk white decks really hard. Mm-hmm. But I think we would be crazy like not to try this, especially since I think in white we're running 2 Wraths, and it's Wrath of God and Day of Judgment, which are exactly the same card for all intents and purposes. Mm-hmm. And just differentiating the 2 Wraths that we're running has some appeal for me as well.
Moving into blue, so Mu Yanling Wind Rider, good card, but such a maybe it's just me, but like Chinese character riding the wind on a wooden boat in the middle of the sea with flavor text, assuming that like insinuating that she's looking for some mentor in some far off land. What the hell is this doing here?
She's just like a side. She's just like over there. She's not even participating in the race. She's just like
why is this? And like Mu Yanling is like her whole shtick, and she doesn't have a lot of background, but like she's this elegant like water wizard or some shit. Why does she make a vehicle?
I don't know.
This is weird.
It's the boat she's in.
Whatever. It's weird. It's strange. But anyway, the card is 2 blue for a 2/4 human wizard pilot, which is just a bizarre pipeline. And it's funny because there are a number of creatures in this set that like have the pilot type but don't have like the pilot mechanic, where they're better at crewing vehicles than their power would imply, which is interesting. But whatever. When it ETBs, you make a 3/2 vehicle with crew 1. And then whenever one or more creatures you control with flying deal combat damage to a player, draw a card. So, like, obviously, the vehicle that this brings in that it can crew will draw you cards in the air, which is, like, kind of nice. The stat line would have been impressive in the old days for a blue card at this cost. Now it's just kind of fine. It doesn't die to bolt variants or whatever.
Okay, I didn't miss it. That you didn't say vehicles you control have flying. I didn't miss it that time. You just skipped the part about vehicles not having.
Oh no! I'm sorry. I totally did. Yeah, I totally did. Vehicles you control have flying. So like the vehicle that you make is going to have like has flying. And then like if you like, unless you're playing like a vehicle theme and you're. We should bring back Subterranean Schooner.
Yeah, we can make it what it was supposed to be.
Yeah, exactly. So this card's cool for us at least because it just turns out that like a lot of the best blue creatures happen to have flying, and having them draw cards when they do damage is nice. I think this is a solid card. I don't think this is like an all-timer super powerful card or whatever, but I like a lot of what's going on here, and I think we're going to test it.
Yeah, this is sneaky like 4 mana 5/6 worth of stats in a blue card, which is like kind of spicy. I think it's a card that's probably worse than Enduring Curiosity, but that's not a reasonable. Like a lot of cards are worse than Enduring Curiosity.
That card's really good.
And also a card can be worse than that card and be meaningfully different. And I think this card adding multiple game objects and kind of creating its own pressure and allowing you to do that is like totally fine. I'm not super excited with a 4-drop that doesn't have flash, but it is probably the kind of stat line like Kefnet. It's the kind of like overall package that you need to get out of a card that does that, I think.
Yeah, agreed. One thing that I dislike about it a little bit is at the very, like I think the way that a lot of blue decks are designed, If you are very blue, like a lot of your low power creatures that you would crew the vehicle with have flying already, and tapping your 2/4 to put a 3/2 flyer in the air isn't necessarily like where you want to be, although like I'm sure it works or whatever. And you often don't see blue paired with like white cards that make a lot of tokens because there just doesn't tend to be a lot of cross synergy there. But one nice thing is if you're playing this in like a Simic ramp deck or like a heavily blue-green deck that's maybe like splashing white or black, later on in the game when you don't need the mana anymore, this turns your Llanowar Elves into a 3/2 flyer that draws cards. So I think this is solid.
Yeah, I will admit I like this card a lot. I could see it being the kind of card like Kaito though. The blue-black Kaito from Duskmourn is like a standard constructed powerhouse, like crazy card. But in our cube specifically, it's pretty mid. It's been like maybe even like underpowered a little bit. And for whatever reason, the context of our cube just doesn't enable that card in a way that lets it really shine. And I could see Moo being the same way, where I'm not sure this card actually plays super well with the way our blue decks are generally constructed, but it's an interesting and powerful enough card that I think we should probably test it.
Yeah. I wonder what Jang Yangu's up to these days.
Oh god.
Teld, I'll give you 30 seconds on the next one.
Yeah.
Why wasn't this just Fibblethip?
This is how are we saying this? Winkst?
Verbose
host?
Vinwixt.
Sure, whatever. It's a 2-mana 0/4 that should have been Fibblethip, and it has start your engines, and you have no maximum hand size and max speed. If you would draw a card, draw 2 cards instead. I only wanted to mention this card because I think it's bad, but it's Commander Brainrot incarnate, and 2, I'm looking forward to Chris being like, man, I played this in my Malcolm Brawl deck, and it is insane.
It didn't even occur to me when I first read this card, so thank you for pointing that out, because it will be crazy. It will be very crazy in that deck. I think it's really funny that he's a verbose host that doesn't have a mouth. But yeah, or at least not one that I can see. But yeah, anyway, that's that card. I tossed this next one on here real quick. There's not much to say about it. This is Waxen's Shape Thief. It is a 4-mana 0/0 shapeshifter with flash, and then you may have this creature enter as a copy of an artifact or creature you control. Ordinarily, like 4-mana clone your own stuff, even at flash speed, is not very good, but they slapped cycling 2 on it, which is a pretty cheap cycling cost. So if you don't have a good target for it, you can just cycle it, and if you do have a good target for it, then it can be pretty powerful. So if this effect sounds interesting to you, they slapped cycling on it, and I think that makes... We were talking about with the Wrath, cards that are situationally very good and situationally very bad. You put cycling on that bad boy, and it gets a lot better.
Scryfall dubbed this Cyclone.
Ooh, I like that. Okay, next, let's talk about whatever is happening here. This guy looks like your local metal scene guy who didn't grow up with the rest of his peers and is still at the dive bar hitting on 21-year-old girls who think he's gross.
Yeah. So this is Transit Mage. It's 2 and a blue for a 2/2 uncommon when human wizard. When it enters, you can search your library for an artifact card with mana value 4 or 5, reveal it, put it in your hand, then shuffle. It fetches a lot of very powerful mid-range cards. It fetches Aetherworks Reservoir and things like that, depending on the environment it's in. This card's probably good, but man, this art is atrocious. Also, a couple of things that really bother me. One, why does this guy have a midriff? That's really unsettling. The shirt doesn't fit all the way. Dude, get a bigger, go to a tailor, get a bigger shirt. Yep. Secondly, it's a human, but it has horns, and it's unclear what the little demon-looking thing in the bottom right-hand corner of this art is actually supposed to be doing.
The depth of field on it is also really strange.
Yeah, I hate everything about this card because all of the other mages looked like artificers. They looked like people that were, I don't know. They just looked like fantasy characters, and then you're gonna play this one that is, gonna fetch some very important cards. And it's just going to be, this is peak, I need to get somebody to alter art this. This is my early worst art of 2025 frontrunner.
You have to kind of squint to even realize that there is a car in here, because for whatever reason, this random phantom that has nothing to do with transit in any way is obscuring the car. And he's got a massive guitar, which also does not relate to the theme of the set at all. An easy slam dunk for this art, speaking of cards looking like artificers, would be to have an artificer type dude like with the hood of like an insane hot rod popped, and he's like working on some crazy looking like fantasy engine with like ether shit going on. It would have been like
have some sort of like wrench or spanner in his hand, and you know you can make a reference about like how you've removed all the safety valves from the car, so it'll go faster.
Or something. Wizards, give us jobs, Jesus Christ! Stop stealing from us.
The last thing I want to say about this card is that this had to be a directive that this card needed to look like this, because the artist is Mark Poole, who is go type in artist Mark Poole on Scryfall and just look at some of the work that he's done. For those at home, this is the same guy that did the art for cards like Balance, Ollie of Cairo, and Farseek. Or not Farseek, what's the one-man enchantment that plays lands? Fastmod.
Oh shit, sorry, real quick, I just noticed he did Ancestral Recall.
Yes.
Huh, okay, anyway.
Yeah, so early front runner for start of the year. Last blue card here is Thopter Fabricator, 2 and a blue for a 4/4 vehicle with crew 2. It has flying, and when you draw your second card each turn, create a 1/1 Thopter artifact creature with flying. This reads as pretty powerful to me. I've really liked this space of like doing something when you draw your second card each turn, doing something that affects the board when you draw your second card each turn. We saw that last year with Emrakul's Messenger and Mischievous Mystic, which both individually played out pretty powerfully. This is kind of like a beefed up, rare version of that. Of course, it's in the form of a vehicle, which has like obvious benefits and downsides to it. Sometimes it won't actually be able to attack, but when it does, it hits actually pretty damn hard. But yeah, if you play this next turn, you make a 1/1, like that's already great. I like that it kind of slowly makes its own crew fodder if you can't already crew it, so that's nice. A little skeptical about just like running it out on 3 with no other protection. It's the type of thing that could get you run over, but hopefully you can stabilize the following turn is the hope. So yeah, some upsides and downsides to this one, but it reads as a powerful card to me.
Cool art.
Yeah,
it is cool.
I like this one. I'm not sure that it gets there because vehicles are, like you said, vehicles are always a little worse than they read, and I think this card reads pretty well, but I can see it definitely being a little bit clunky. On the other hand, like it does let you do stuff like in blue, you know, if you have like little dorky white creatures, this is like kind of pretty good, right? You curve like, Thraben Inspector, Splitskin Doll, play this, and then you can like, if you're playing like a blue-white deck, and you can crew it up. You've got a big beefy blocker, big beefy attacker that like churns in some more card draw into dudes.
I mean, for my money, and it's obviously a very different card, but for my money, for like our cube at least, I think Mischievous Mystic is significantly better than this just because it's cheaper. It's always on as an attacker or whatever. But one thing that's notable about this card is it is an artifact and it makes artifacts.
Yeah, also you can curve, and this is maybe again a little too cute, but you can curve this into Mu Yanling, and she crews this and then draws you a card when you hit with
gives it
and then you
flying.
trigger it. Yeah,
She gives
it gives it fly, super flying.
Wouldn't it be funny is if you give like a card super flying, it enters the stratosphere and runs out of oxygen and just dies. Like if you give something double flying, it just dies instantly.
Like Icarus, it flies too close to the sun.
Yeah. Icarus flies too close to the sun, or it just gets catapulted into space or something.
That's funny. If they're gonna juice this sort of effect, the 3-drop slot might actually be like a great place to do it, because then you can go Malcolm, Keatsa, Looter on 2 into this on 3.
Yeah.
That's
and
true.
Then get your trigger right away. That's the juicy spot, is if you can get your trigger right away off of the turn you play this, which might make it like a better turn 4 play where you go like this into opt or something like that.
I think this is also the kind of card that just for me, like, it's never going to replace Mischievous Mystic, so this would be a question of, like, do we want a second effect of this for density? And this is the kind of effect that, like, kind of builds its own deck, especially at Peasant, but even in our cube, I think with cards like Malcolm and stuff, this is a meaningful amount of power output.
Yeah, we do have a lot of looting in blue. So, yeah, no, it's a cool card. I don't know if, like, we've got a lot of good blue 3-drops these days, but, yeah, if you're doing an artifact, Tim, I assume for the like affinity cube, this is something you're absolutely going to be trying out.
Yeah, this seems sweet. Artifacts that make more artifacts.
Okay, so moving into black, the first card to talk about is Speed Demon. This is a 5-mana 5/5 Flampler, which on its own, that's not crazy impressive. Like we've seen Doom Whisper like being a 6/6 with the same keywords, like in a much less powerful period in Magic's history. But what it does do, it has start your engines. So remember, when you start your engines, whenever something will start your engines, ETBs, you automatically start on 1. And then at the beginning of your end step, you draw X cards and lose X life, where X is your speed. So if your opponent doesn't have instant speed removal, or even if they do and they just happen to like tap out on their turn, you play this, you go to your end step, you lose 1 life, and you draw a card. So it's kind of like a 5-mana 5/5 Flampler that cantripped, which is pretty good. As you do more damage to your opponent and your speed goes up, you start drawing more cards and losing more life. This doesn't have haste, which it's funny Tim mentioned. Like Speed Demon feels like it should have been. This name should have been used on a red card specifically. But the other thing that really sucks about this card is like the art is like incomprehensible. Like I cannot see what's going on at all. And like Speed Demon is just an easy slam dunk. Just like put a metal as fuck looking demon in a metal as fuck hot rod. Like that's not hard. This art is so busy, I don't know who could possibly have come up with this prompt. Like, they must have either had a terrible fever or recently taken acid.
Yeah, I actually think they should have referenced the last ride, which is a black card we're not going to talk about. That's the Death Shadow variant in this set. And in that art, it's like the car is being followed by this big blue demon. What if that was like that, but reframed where the demon was the center point? And it's like riding on the car and it's, it's like red, just raging in metal. I think that would have been awesome. Also, just keep in mind, the turn you play this, if you're able to deal damage, which black decks that are playing this card hopefully will be able to, your speed can go to 2, and now you're playing a 5/5 Night's Whisper with Flying and Trample. That Night's Whispers again on the next turn, or draws you 3 cards and starts getting you perilously low on life.
Yeah, that's true. When I initially read it, I read it as like you lose. I don't know why my brain did this because the English words on it do not say this. But I was like, I kind of read it as like Sorin, the Sorin 4-mana planeswalker where you lose life equal to their mana value. And I was like, oh, this is just the card that instantly kills you. I think, though, the thing is, if they remove it, then obviously the effect's not on board anymore, right? And if I play a 5/5 Flying Trample that on end step Night's Whispers, and then you untap and like you basically have to kill this or you're going to die to it before it kills me, like a 5/5 Flying Trample that must be answered, and if it is answered, I'm up 2 cards is kind of crazy. I think that this is strong.
Yeah, definitely. I think the cool thing too is going to be, how do I find a way to play this card in a dirtly grindy control deck and have this be my finisher and not die to it? So, like, for example, one of the follow-up plays that I think could be really sick with this card is if you curve it into Steel Seraph, or if you have Steel Seraph in play, you can give it Lifelink. And now you gain 5 life, which offsets the life you're going to lose to draw cards.
See, what you should be doing is you should be playing Aclazotz and then playing this after you play Aclazotz.
Sure, yeah.
Just as an aside, I know we've talked about Aclazotz a lot. Like, we're considering this because we decided that, like, Aclazotz is just way too fucking obnoxious. This is not nearly as good as Aclazotz is.
I see they had a line of flavor text that they needed to just stick on a card somewhere, too.
Caution is for those who falter.
What does that mean? That's not the flavor text that should be on this big legendary speed demon creature, but whatever.
The alt art is sick.
I do like the alt art, but there's like 20 cards that all look exactly identical with this type of artistic direction, so like they're just all interchangeable.
The background color sucks too.
Yeah, it's a little jank. But
that's really, really weird looking.
Gonna throw in another peasant include here that I think is worth talking about. So Grim Bauble, it's a little. I kind of like it. It's like a little demon bobblehead on someone's dashboard. It's kind of stupid, but
I think it's one of the better arts in the set, personally.
Yeah, it looks like someone actually drew this.
Yeah,
it does. Single black mana for an artifact at common. When this artifact enters target creature an opponent controls, gets -2/-2 until end of turn. So talking about like sorcery speed disfigure there. 2 and a black, tap it, sack it, surveil 2. So you're giving up the instant speed and combat trick nature of a disfigure, but you're tacking on like this kind of mid-game, late-game Surveil 2. Plus, this is a permanent, so there are ways to take advantage of this just having a permanent on board. This is not a strict upgrade to Disfigure. There are times where it's better to have Disfigure, but I think this card's quite strong in comparison. I think there will be more times where this is better than Disfigure than when it's worse than Disfigure.
Yeah, I mean, it's an artifact, right? So Delirium, like, artifacts that put themselves in the graveyard are great for Delirium. In black decks with recursive creatures, sometimes you're just going to sacrifice this, and your top 2 cards are going to be like a land and a blood gas, and you just dig. You basically, in that case, you kind of just, if you don't need the land, you just kind of drew 2 cards, which is crazy. Fuels the graveyard for Kroxa, gets you a lot closer to Delirium for Darcy. Like, this little package, it's like so elegant. It's so cool.
Yeah, I look forward to converting this into a 1-mana 3/1 in Peasant with Sokinson Smelter. But yeah, there's a lot of stuff. Obviously in Peasant, this card's going to be completely ridiculous. But even here, I think it's pretty good. I think the most notable time it's going to be something that you notice it being worse than Disfigure is when your opponent is monstrous raging you in the face and a Disfigure would have killed their creature. But because this is a sorcery speed effect, so you do have to be a little more timing sensitive with it. But overall, just, yeah, very, very solid card. I think if it ends up in the graveyard, I don't know how many ways we have to recur things in the cube at the moment for non-creatures, but I mean, that is something you can do, is like permanent recursion effects can pick this up potentially. And just without it, just the synergy is pretty good. Just like Hopeless Nightmare was kind of close, and I think this is meaningfully better in most of the time.
Who added Quag Feet? I assume this is added to Complain.
No. I added it because Teld and I talked about it last night, and while I think you want Bitter Triumph in your deck over this, like a huge percentage of the time. It is kind of a unique black removal spell, and the feedback that we're getting is like not all of our black removal has to be as good as Bitter Triumph. This is Quag Feast. It is 1 in a black for a sorcery. Choose target creature, planeswalker, or vehicle. For most environments, just shortcut to creature or planeswalker. Mill 2 cards, then destroy the chosen permanent if its mana value is less than or equal to the number of cards in the yard. I've actually come up on this a little bit because in the early game, if you're snapping off a 2-mana removal spell to kill something, like doesn't this count itself, or does the effect go off before this goes to the graveyard?
No, the last thing that'll happen is this. So it does the effect and then it goes to the graveyard.
Okay, but either way, like if you're snapping a removal spell off on 2, chances are you're targeting something that costs 2 or less mana anyway. And then as the game progresses and cards go to the graveyard in your control deck, either by removing things or in your creature deck, having your creatures removed or trading them off, I think that this is going to be able to like reasonably hit something worth the mana a good percentage of the time, and it also mills cards. And we're in a context now where blue and red and white all have ways to leverage the graveyard pretty effectively. Green, not as much. But it's a cool card. I mean, Bitter Triumph is the only other black card that we're running that kills I guess Blot Out gets planeswalkers, but those are more expensive. And there's a good number of ways to take advantage of milling cards in black now. So I think that this is interesting enough to test. It is a sorcery, which is a little bit of a bummer, but I kind of like this design.
Yeah, I think early game, I mean, you're on the first couple of turns of the game, like obviously on the draw, specifically on turn 2, this card's like kind of sketchy because your opponent played a 3. I guess they didn't. On the draw, you would still be able to kill their 2-drop, so that's probably fine. It could get a little awkward on turn 3, right? If you need to kill like a 3-drop and you can't do that. But I think this card being able to kill planeswalkers is pretty meaningful, given that we're currently running 4 in white, and as well as Chandra, which is a card you have to kill immediately. Kind of Vivian, but Nissa is a card you need to kill immediately. And then on top of that, this also picks up Smuggler's Copter and Reckoner Bankbuster, which are 2 cards that can be very, very annoying to deal with. And you need to get them off the table. So I think this card probably catches enough things with decent enough scaling and target selection that, especially if you care about milling, which, like you pointed out, most of our colors in some way care about milling or care about putting cards in their yard. And that is a bonus. So I think the Mill 2 is just kind of upside on top of being just a pretty decent removal spell. Like, Sorcery Speed's not exciting, and it needs a little bit of time to scale up in some spots. I'm sure there's going to be times where this is super awkward. But I think catching those really powerful vehicles, catching those powerful planeswalkers, and just being a clean creature removal spell as well is pretty good.
Yeah, I kind of wish this was uncommon because it feels very similar to like Fell with Synergy, but I get why it's rare. I mean, it hits a lot of different targets. It does Synergy stuff and Constructed, so it feels like a lower end rare, but it's kind of the type of rares I wish they made more often, is like slightly lower power than average, but more synergistic when you have something going on with it. It reminds me a lot of Witherbloom Command. It's like snipe a small creature, do some milling, get some other stuff, but not super strong overall. I do like the design. I don't know how it plays in comparison to a Doomblade, but I agree it's definitely more interesting than Doomblade number 4. Do you want to take the first red 1-drop here? We've actually got another good 1-drop to talk about.
Yeah, so this is they printed another red 1-drop in the set. They actually printed several red 1-drops in the set, but we like this one quite a bit better than the rare one, which we're not going to bother to read. This is Grease Wrench Goblin. It's kind of funny. Like, people are like, oh, Falcon Wrath Pitfighter when that came out, which was a rare Savannah Lions that you could pay 2 mana, sacrifice it, and discard a card to draw a card.
If you dealt damage.
I forgot about that clause. Yeah, God, that card sucks. This is an uncommon. It is 1 red for a 2/1 Goblin Artificer, so Savannah Lions. But you can also exhaust it. So remember, exhaust is an ability that it has that you can only activate 1 time. You exhaust it for 2 and a red. You can discard up to 2 cards. That's meaningful that, it's up to 2 cards. And then you draw that many cards. And then you put a +1/+1 counter on this creature. So early game, Savannah Lions. Once it can't get any more at a later time, filtering your 2-hand for 2 cards in a red deck in the later game, especially if you're smart enough to sandbag a land or 2 that you don't need, is very good, and it becomes a 3/2. This is just solid.
Yeah, I mean, this is where we get into, we talk sometimes about meaningful versus not, or like significant versus insignificant, and this is a pretty meaningful upside. Yeah. It's a little expensive, but just being able to get rid of a couple of cards that are rotting in your hand in order to keep on the pressure is probably worth 3 mana when you need to do it. Especially as we learned with Kellen, because it's an instant speed ability, you can hold up your burn spell or whatever, and then your opponent doesn't do something that you care about, and you filter your draw a little bit.
Also worth noting, if they kill it in response, you still get to do the discard. I do like that they tacked on some amount of +1/+1 counters to a lot of the exhaust abilities in this set. That way you're adding to your board just a little bit on top of like these kind of super expensive activated abilities. Most exhaust abilities are in the expensive realm, so giving you the extra +1/+1 counters is nice, even though upgrading your 2/1 to a 3/2 on like turn 4 or 5 isn't like going to really save it in combat that much. And it's an onboard trick, so it's not like anyone's going to run into it, but the nice little 1-drop. We got a 2-drop in contention as well. More goblins energy all the way around.
So this is Draconautics Engineer. It's 1 in a red for a 2/2 Goblin Artificer at rare. It has exhaust for 1 red mana. Other creatures you control gain haste, put a +1 counter on this creature, and then exhaust 3 in a red, create a 4/4 dinosaur dragon creature token with flying. So I think the obvious comparison is to Dragonkin Berserker, but I do think those cards are kind of different in a pretty notable way, where I think Dragonkin Berserker is better at locking down the early game and also being kind of the kind of threat that can potentially take over a game, whereas I feel like this is just more of like a this feels to me more like a red aggressively slanted mid-range card that is just trying to puke out a bunch of value one time and just be like kind of good. I think both of them are totally fine and playable and pretty good. I think the curve you're probably wanting to hit with this is like turn 5, you make a dragon, give it haste, and then buff this up and you like ship for 8, which is pretty good. But the lack of first strike and the threat of boasting on this card does make it play out a little different, and I'm not sure like which one's better, which one's worse, and like what spots exactly they'll be better or worse.
I think we could just run both, right? Like you read this, and because of the dragon manufacturing text, I think it's tempting to compare them for that reason. But you know, as you sort of like, Dragonkin Berserker has first strike, which I know I say this way too much, but first strike is at its absolute best in red, because of instant speed burn, doing things like basically turning your burn spells into combat tricks. It's much better defensively. It's a lot easier to get it into combat. This, notably, like you don't have to do the 2 abilities on the same turn. So if you're playing this in like a Gruul deck, like if you haven't done the exhaust thing yet, you could just like play a big honkin' fucking green creature and then just hurl it at your opponent like instantaneously. And the +1/+1 counter on this creature is attached to that exhaust ability. So if you're flinging a big creature at your opponent out of nowhere with haste, which Arena of Glory showed us is very, very, very strong, and you're also making this larger, that represents a significant threat.
I was going to say, I like that the dragon making ability also has flash. So, like, one of the things you can do with this card, you can't do a Dragon Berserker, is you don't have to commit your mana if you have other things you could possibly do. This is, again, the Kellen thing where, like, if you hold up red burn or you hold up whatever, you know, interaction piece you want to do, like if you're playing blue cards, that gets really good. And then your opponent doesn't do something you care about, you flash in a dragon and untap, and now you can use the exhaust ability on another card.
Yeah, this is a very cool design. We're definitely going to play it. It seems powerful. The art is a dragon clinging to, or a goblin clinging to a dragon's eyebrows with a rocket on its back.
It's very funny art.
It's very funny art. And personally, I feel like riding a dragon in a race is cheating, because if someone tries to pass you, you can just melt them. But yeah, cool card. Like it a lot. This next design is also very interesting, and Teld actually turned me on to it.
Let's see. So Gastal Thrill Roller is 2 and a red for an artifact vehicle, 4/2 with trample and haste, and when this vehicle enters, it becomes an artifact creature until end of turn. Has crew 2, and then for 2 and a red, you discard a card, return it from your graveyard with a finality counter, and activate it as a sorcery. So why I like this card is that the turn you play it just kind of has ball lightning energy. You're going to throw it at your opponent, and they are obligated to block. If they elect or cannot block, this card's going to get in for 4 free damage with haste, which is very good. But then it's going to also give future creatures you play pseudo haste. Because, any creature you play, you can just obviously crew it and throw it at your opponent. And eventually your opponent's going to have to block. And this is big enough that it's going to trade for pretty much any non-green creature. And then later into the game, one of the ways red decks lose is that they draw one too many mountains. And this card allows you to say, okay, instead of a mountain, how about I drew a Gastol Thrill Roller? And throw 4 more damage at their face. So I really like the total package. This is the kind of vehicle that I don't feel like the sort of vehicles are worse than they read is a text applies to, because this card just lets you play it. Like, you get to throw at your opponent the turn you play it regardless of what you do. So it's just a creature. Like, you have to crew it on future spots, but you're playing this as kind of a ball lightning. So your future uses of it, if you get them, are kind of gravy.
Yeah, double ball lightning, and in red black, like, there are all kinds of cards that you're actually just like, oh yeah, sure, I'll discard that, Tenacious Underdog, why not?
Yeah, you get to do stuff like discard Bloodghast, play my land, return Bloodghast, use it to crew the Thrill Roller or whatever on the next turn.
Yeah, this is if you see this on the other side of the battlefield in the graveyard, you have to just respect the fact that your opponent can nug you for 4 at any time, so kind of changes the way you have to play. I do see, I think Gastol is like a Mad Max world in MTG or something like that. But okay. I see Gastol, and you know what I think?
No one works like Gastol.
No one's slick as Gastol. No one's quick as Gastol. I can't help it. Yeah. Anyway, yeah.
I wish I liked the art more, but let's talk about the Chandra, where the art is actually incredible sick. I love the art on the Chandra.
Got the Akiri
slider, yeah.
I'll read it real quick because I'm actually super excited. Well, maybe not excited about the card, but I feel like if you didn't know, there are 21 Chandras in Magic, and I feel like it took the 21st Chandra to create one that isn't just, oh, look, Chandra does fire things. And so, like,
21st time's the charm, boys.
Yeah, 21st time's the charm. Chandra Spark Hunter, 3 and a red for a 4 loyalty Chandra Planeswalker. The passive ability says, at the beginning of combat on your turn, choose up to 1 target vehicle you control. Until end of turn, it becomes an artifact creature with haste. So cruise a vehicle with haste each turn as a passive. +2, you may sacrifice an artifact or discard a card. If you do, draw a card. 0, create a 3/2 vehicle artifact token with crew 1. And then -7, you get an emblem with whenever an artifact you control enters, this emblem deals 3 damage to any target. So worth noting, if you want this just ticks up to 6 loyalty right away, which is a lot. If you use the 0 ability with the passive, this is just a 4 loyalty walker that makes a 3/2 haste on the turn that it comes into play. And the -7 is 3 turns away with a ton of loyalty to back it up. So, I mean, the -7, you might not even use it, honestly, because how many other artifacts are you playing? Like, maybe not that much outside of the 0 ability, but I don't know how good it is to just stack up a bunch of 3/2 vehicles. But the first one seems very relevant, and then the +2 ability of just filtering cards and keeping your hand like full of gas seems really good. No pun intended on gas, but I think this is a really cool card. I think the cropping doesn't do justice to the art of this card, which is something I've noticed on a lot of the arts in this set. But the art's really cool. The Chandra's really cool. I am just glad that they made a Chandra that is not just like burn related, like damage related. It's a really unique design.
I think this is probably just straight up sick if you have a heavy artifact theme in your red section. Because, like, yeah, if in a lot of artifact cubes, like, red just does a lot of shenanigans with treasure, and, like, +2ing to sacrifice a treasure each turn to draw cards is just good.
Yeah, I actually kind of wonder, is this card just, like, kind of playable? Because I think the 0 ability, make it a 3/2 haste the turn you play it, is not incredible on a 4-drop, but it's okay. And then if we untap, we've basically got a card filtering / card draw factory that upticks really, really fast. And we also can just use it to just throw 3/2s at our opponent every turn, which, like, kind of also saves. It lets us save our creatures, give our creatures. I've mentioned a bunch, the vehicles giving pseudo haste to your future creatures. I'm not sure how much a traditional red deck is super interested in this, but I don't know. I just, like, reading this card, I was like, man, this throws a lot of damage at your opponent pretty quickly. It lets you upscale all of your creatures relatively fast. Like, if you're looking to do the loyalty thing, you can uptick it. It lets you grind out with just the loyalty ability, right? Because you can kind of cycle between making a vehicle and then sacrificing it to draw an extra card every other turn, which is, like, again, not incredible, but decent when you're upticking relatively quickly. I think there's a lot to like about this card, even if you're not super artifact dense.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. If you're playing like a deliberately lower power cube, I think that you could probably just play this in your red section. If you're like the type of cube that's like, okay, like Chandra Torch of Defiance, Hazoret, Rekindling Phoenix, and all these other cards are on the table, probably not. But I mean, I think it is a cool mid-power red card outside of an artifact environment. Like, you know, you can play it, you hurl the 3/2 at your opponent, and then bear in mind, like, you can hurl the 3/2 at your opponent again the next turn, and if they don't trade for it, you can just +2 and sacrifice it, you attack with it twice, and you draw a card. Yeah, it's a cool card. I don't think we're going to play it in our mainline cube, but for those of you that maintain artifact-themed cubes, this is like a fucking slam dunk of an artifact planeswalker.
Yeah, very cool. One red card to close things out here.
Yeah. So, Outpace Oblivion is 2 and a red for an enchantment with Start Your Engine, and when it enters, it deals 5 damage to one target creature or planeswalker, and you can pay 2 to sacrifice it. It deals 2 to each player that doesn't have max speed. So I mean, 3 mana deal 5 is like pretty, still like not something we get a ton of. There's a few cards that do it, but it's not something that's just a given, especially on an enchantment. Which we don't have a lot of ways to, again, reuse these sort of effects, but that's more of the peasant discussion. But just in general, I think 3 mana, like, kill your big thing, and then I get a little bit of reach. Like, if I'm the red deck, I probably don't care that I'm likely taking 2 damage to deal 2 to you. I just want to be able to, like, turn this into a shock later in the game that goes face. So I think it's just, like, the total package here is pretty nice. Like, good removal spell, little bit of extra reach is just, like, pretty nice overall package, I think.
I like it. I mean, obviously, as a removal spell, it's like way worse than Soulseer, which is an instant that deals 5 damage and removes indestructible from stuff. But what pushes this over the edge for me is the reach that, as we mentioned, you know, if you're the red deck, even if you haven't reached max speed yet, by the time you sacrifice this, like oftentimes, like your life total is not the point of the game.
Also helps with Delirium.
Yeah, well, that's what I was actually getting to, is like that by itself, I don't know if would push me over the edge, but like it can be pretty tough to send enchantments to your own graveyard, and like that artifacts and enchantments that put themselves in the graveyard are like the dream for Delirium, because those tend to be the cards that are the hardest to put in the graveyard for Delirium, and this does that. So Darcy, stay winning. This is a cool card.
Yeah, not just Delirium either, but just Kroxa, Detective's Phoenix, cards that want cards in the graveyard. You know, this is just a removal spell that puts itself in the graveyard. I guess that would be true of
that would be true of any removal spell. Yeah. So anyway, that's red. I think it is very fitting that a Death Race themed set with a nominal focus on Avishkar would have a good spread of red cards. That's kind of like Kaladesh's legacy. We've talked about this before, but it is really, really nuts that Kaladesh is as old as it is, and it still is the contributor of like some of the best red cards for Cube. There's a reason that the red deck was so insanely dominant during that period. The red's best cards were just way better than anything else. I want to talk about this next one because I want to complain a lot.
Okay.
This is Aganasaur Rex. Not about the power level. This card is strong. Aganasaur Rex is a 5-mana 8/8 trample. I'm just waiting for the day where they're like, man, green's still not featured in Standard. I guess we better print a 5-mana 12/12.
Still wouldn't be good.
Still probably wouldn't be good. But it's a 5-mana 8/8 trample with cycling, 2 and a green. High cycling costs are like they're at their best in green because you're going to have the most mana. But crucially, when you cycle this card, you put 2 +1/+1 counters on up to one target creature or vehicle, and it gains trample and indestructible until end of turn. So like that in and of itself is like a pretty solid combat trick, which also, by the way, draws a card and cannot be countered. And that is, we probably wouldn't put like 2 and a green, put 2 +1/+1 counters on target creature or vehicle against trample and indestructible until end of turn and draw a card. Actually, we might.
We played Trash the Town for a little bit. It was pretty good. I mean, like, right, that card could draw 2, but like it, you know,
that's a playable card.
We did play very similar effect.
Also that card would have can't be countered on it. So that card in a very combat focused cube is actually kind of close to playable, and it's just like tacked on to an 8/8 trample for 5. This is really strong. I think we might get complaints about this card when it starts blanking removal spells and also starts coming down and being like, you lose the game because you can't remove it, but we'll see.
I'm sorry, but like if we're complaining because we lose to Overstat and French Vanilla, then like that's where I'm gonna just tune out the conversation, because
fair play.
Sure, Elder Gargoth and things like that, when you lose to them, that's one thing. They snowball the game, they create an immense amount of value. This is just big. Like, go wide, go tall, use a removal spell, whatever. I don't
Yeah, fair play.
You'll find a way to beat it. Like your 2-mana, it does not have ward. Your 2-mana removal spell is going to kill it at a huge tempo advantage. Like you're putting this card in your cube because you want the effect on the cycling, and the buyout mode of like, I need a creature is like 5-mana 8/8, which is really statted pretty well. But if you're not playing additional protection for this thing, like you're not going to untap with it in most spots.
Here is my principal complaint about this card. We are doing a set about a death race. You printed an enormous T-Rex, and it is not chasing a Jeep down a narrow, muddy jungle path. That it's Jurassic Park. That would have been such a layup. Like,
it was an easy layup.
How did you leave that on the table? Jesus, Mary and Joseph. Anyway, just they printed this, and I was like, "Ooh, where's the Jeep?" And then I was like, "Oh, they fucked it up." I knew that they would.
I don't know if you saw it, but I then went and edited it. I like pasted a Jeep into it and told you had missed it initially. I don't know if you ever saw that one.
I did.
I will say also one last thing is I've been asking for like an additional good Whatley target just to like increase the density at which if you ever flip Whatley, you have a target in your deck to go fetch, and this is that.
Mm-hmm.
I know Cyclone's not like, it isn't put on cards for flavor reasons, but I like the idea of dinosaur like crawling into a little ball and just like do like rolling away or something
Sonic
like that.
the Hedgehog.
Yeah, card's big. I from a gameplay perspective, I never felt like Verdurous Gearhulk was like, I can't beat that card, and that's basically 8/8 trample if you need to with some other functionality. Cyclone's kind of a really nice buyout on just giant dumb creature, but 8/8 trample for 5 reads very impressive, but I think is actually just like fine. Like manageable is what I should say. It's really strong. I don't want to undersell it.
Yeah, I mean, the first time somebody loses this, I do expect to hear, "Oh my god, I can't believe it! It's an 8/8 with trample. It costs only 5 mana. It's big. It's so big."
I don't think we're gonna hear that. I think we're gonna hear the complaint about the cycle and blowing somebody out.
Probably.
We'll get both. Don't worry about it. All right, so let's move on.
Okay, so speaking of complaining, one of the main complaints we have received lately is 1, your cube has too many flyers, and 2, you don't have enough artifact and enchantment removal. So may I introduce you to Web Strike Elite, green for a 3/3 insect archer with reach and cycling X green, and when you cycle it, you destroy up to 1 artifact or enchantment with mana value X. So, complainers, here's your reach creature that also blows up enchantments. You have to pick, but it does both of those things.
Yeah. I feel like I like Scrap Shooter more than I like this card, but I think that this card is good.
I don't think you can't run both. I think you can just run both.
No, totally. That's not what I'm trying to say at all. I was just kind of thinking about.
I do agree. Scrap Shooter is the better card.
Yeah, but this is good.
This is one of the more vintage cube playable cards on this list, I think, on account of like green cycle for 0, blow up a Mox, especially if it's like a Chrome Mox or something like that. Mox Opal. Not Mox Opal, but whatever. You get the point. Like being able to just pay 2 mana to cantrip and kill a 0 mana artifact seems pretty relevant, and then it scales up from there. Plus green 3/3 reach. That's pretty good.
Yeah, I don't think this card's exciting, but I do think it's solid.
Insect Archer. I kind of like the art. It's a nice little Dutch angle there for you. Not too much else to say about it.
Nope, just a good card. Next card is I'm really there's just such a parade of good green 3-drops at this point. It's just but anyway, this is an interesting one.
Can I interest you in 2 more of them?
Yeah, can I interest you in 2 more of them? So the next 2 things are vehicles, which are interesting in green. The first one is Thunderous Velocipede, which does not have haste. They keep doing this to us.
A lot of speed names on non-hasted cards is a little upsetting.
Can I also throw in my mild complaint that there wasn't a Velociraptor in this set?
Yeah, it's funny. Probably somebody was like, "Oh, that's 2 on the nose," and missed the fact that everything that they do is 2 on the nose, so it wouldn't have bothered anybody. So Thunderous Velocipede is 1 green for a 5/5 trample vehicle. Each other vehicle and creature you control enters with an additional +1/+1 counter on it if its mana value is 4 or less. Otherwise, it enters with 3 additional +1/+1 counters on it. So right now we're running Tribute to the World Tree, which is a green enchantment that does kind of something similar, but it also draws cards. But this is a 5/5 trample crew 3, so, virtual haste, that's what vehicles do, and it makes all your other stuff big. This just seems like a strong card to me.
Yeah, doesn't also draw you a million cards, so you just can't bury your opponent as easily. It's a little more interactable because if you fire it up with removal open, you could kill it. So I think Tribute is the more like engine-y powerful card, but this is probably just a more playable card overall in our cube.
It is kind of the reverse of what you would want, though, right? Like you would want more +1 counters on the smaller mana value things and less +1 counters on the bigger things. Like, having your elf come down as a 4/4 would be way
That would be crazy with token generation, though. Like, if it was +3/+3 on all your small creatures, it's just like, okay, here's my, like, resolute reinforcements, like, enjoy my 2/4/4s.
That's true, Though I think Tribute to the World Tree is already doing something very close to what that would be doing anyway. But
that's true.
It's a compromise. Like you said, this is a 3-mana 5/5 trample when it gets into combat on top of the buff in your other board. I mean, it's just stats. All it is just a ton of stats across your board, like Railway Brawler. No other utility beyond just putting stats on board.
I honestly think I like this more than World Tree, not because it's not apples to apples, but because I know when people lose to Tribute, it just feels like I can't beat that because I don't get opportunities to remove it. And you could theoretically do the same thing with this card, right? You don't ever have to expose it to removal if you don't want to, but if you don't get it into combat ever, then it's not also a card draw engine on top of everything else. So this to me kind of strikes me as like fixed Tribute for R-Cube at least.
Yeah, next up is Lumbering World Wagon. It is 2 and a green for another artifact vehicle. Its power is equal to the number of lands you control. It's a star 4, and when it enters or attacks, you can search your library for a basic land, put it into play, and then it has crew 4. So, I mean, this card just seems fairly strong. It's a 3-mana ramp spell that then puts a potentially big thing into play. Crew 4 is a lot. It's a little less in green where your stat lines are a little bit bigger. And when you attack with this, it's going to make itself bigger and it's going to continue like removing lands out of your deck. It helps you insulate against future wraths with both the creature or like the vehicle part of it, as well as using your mana elf acceleration to convert into actual land drops, which is pretty good. I think this card could be, I think this is one of the ones where when I'm reading and we're talking about vehicles being worse than they read, this is the one that strikes me as like, that's probably where this is at. Like this reads to be very powerful, but I could see it being a good bit worse with Crew 4 and being a 3-mana do nothing in some spots. Although keeping in mind that a good percentage of the time, 3 mana in green means you play this on turn 2.
I'm less excited about this one than the last one, but it is a cool effect.
Yeah, how do you think it stacks up to something like Topiary Panther? Or not Topiary Panther, but Stomper.
Topiary Panther, my beloved.
1 green 4/4, go get a basic when it enters, but it can't attack or block unless you have 7 lands. It's clearly like meant to be a replacement for that constructed.
I think it's better. I think this card is got a much higher ceiling, and you can attack with it earlier into the game. You can get more lands off of it than I think that card was good, but it was, I think this is mostly the same but better in most cases.
Ooh, we're going to give this fly-in with Muyan Ling.
Oh, hell yeah, bro.
We're going to hit him for like 9 in the air. I'm actually interested in why you added the last card here. This one has like...
Oh, I just wanted to mention it. Like, this is definitely not for us. This is March of the World Ooze. It's just an interesting card, and I actually really like the art. 3 green, enchantment. Creatures you control have base power and toughness 6/6 and are oozes in addition to their other types. And then it has some weird blue hate on the back. Whenever an opponent casts a spell, if it's not their turn, you create a 3/3 relevant creature token. But doesn't it just make a 6/6?
Yeah.
Am I missing something? Okay, so I'm not really sure what the deal is with that. Oh, I guess if this enchantment gets removed, then what it reverts to is a 3/3. Okay, I mean, this is kind of a Craterhoof effect without a creature stapled to it, and it's a lot cheap. It's cheaper than Craterhoof effects tend to be because it's not a creature, basically, is what the deal is here.
If only there was a Craterhoof that cost 6 mana and gave everything Vigilance and Menace on top of big stat buffs.
We'll be talking about that in a second.
Yeah, they also teased Garruk in the art of this card, but the people at Wizards cannot confirm or deny whether it's Garruk. Gold cards, we actually have a pretty hefty number of gold cards to talk about here.
In terms of the number of powerful gold cards in this set, like you'd think it was a Ravnica set almost.
you really would. Some 3-color cards too. Plus, I mean, we're going to talk about a decent number of the Gear Hulks, which were kind of designed to be showstopper constructed cards. But I'll kick off with speculative one. Zahir, I don't know. Zahir Glory's Past is white-black for a 3/2 legendary zombie cat warrior. It has start your engines. It has sacrifice another creature, surveil 1, activate only once each turn, and at max speed, whenever a non-token creature you control dies, create a tapped 2/2 black zombie creature token. So baseline, 2 mana 3/2 with a free sacrifice outlet, a once per turn sack outlet, but a sacrifice outlet to surveil 1. And if I stop there, that would be enough for me to get interested. It has a decent stat line. A free sack outlet on 2 mana is really good. Probably needs something else to push it over the top. I don't know if the max speed thing is what it needs to go over the top, because it does not do anything between 1 speed and 4 speed. So you have to get all the way up there. But as I'll note in the Peasant Queue episode a lot, I think Black-White might be one of the best decks at getting max speed because of the Blood Artist effects, right? A dedicated Black-White sacrifice deck, I should say, because it just has a lot of incidental ways to ping your opponent, or, I have Jadar in play, I'm going to go ahead and swing my 2/2. Like, you're going to
Vine Lasher.
Yeah, Vine Lasher is a good example of a way to just ping and stuff like that. So I could theoretically see dropping Zahir, getting a point of damage in with whatever you have on board, and actually working your way up to max speed, in which case sacrifice a creature. Anytime a creature dies, make a 2/2. That's pretty strong.
Well, insulate you from Wraths pretty well at that point. Combos with your Blood Artist to double dip on those. I mean, I think this card is one that I kind of skimmed over at first, but like 2 mana 3/2 with an open-ended sack outlet, or like a mana free sack outlet. I guess it's not open-ended because you can only hit once per turn, but like still, not often do you want to sack more than once per turn. You do occasionally, but like most of the time, for most of the game, once is enough.
You really only do it if you're either getting wrathed, or if you have enough like Blood Artist stuff on play to go for lethal. Outside of those situations, you don't really need to sacrifice multiple times per turn.
I think people really oversell. And, again, I'm going to invoke the Wii Cube a lot. I think people really oversell the scenario where it's like, oh, I have like 8 things on board and I instant speed sack all of them and kill you with your Blood Artist in 1 turn. That's not usually how those decks tend to win. Like, 1 or 2 things is getting sacrificed in a turn at most, and notably the ability to sacrifice another creature, surveil 1, activate only once each turn. It is not a sorcery speed effect, so you can do this twice every turn cycle. So on your opponent's turn, you can sack something in response to removal. You can do it on your own turn as well.
Yeah, the real power of Blood Artist too is like most of the time you don't actually, especially since we removed Meathook. Meathook was the consistent way to do that, right? You play Blood Artist, you play Meathook, and then you kill your opponent. But since we've removed that, I think most of the time what ends up happening is you're using your Blood Artist to break parity on small blocks and extend the game, at which point your opponent just kind of eventually looks at their life total and they're like, oh man, I'm at 8? Uh-oh.
How did that happen? You've attacked me twice.
How could this happen to me? Yeah,
oh shit, guys, this is a cat. We're going to protect this with boss rage.
Oh, damn. Oh, yeah.
Once you get to that point, like, Blood Artists are able to do the like, ooh, I'm going to sack my things and kill you. But I think this card, like, I think this card's good. I mean, we have Ellis Ilkor locking down the 2 mana slot, but we should probably test this.
Free sack outlets are very good.
Obligatory should have been a 2/3.
Sure.
They didn't have room on the card, but I wonder if this would have been too good if it had Menace. The art kind of makes me feel like it should have Menace.
Menace would have been kind of wild, I think.
Yeah, fair enough.
All right, I added the next card here because I was going back through the gold section. I was like, this doesn't fit our blue-red design, but it struck me as like really powerful when I read it.
I wish it did. I fucking love these shark people.
I actually, this is like of all those cards outside Hashton that I would like Commander Brainrot want to make. This has got big Commander energy.
This is the type of card that you see and like you want to kind of like play it and then add stuff to make it work because of how strong it potentially is. But the card here is Captain Howler Sea Scourge. It's 2 blue-red for a 5/4 shark pirate. Ward for 2 mana and 2 life. So kind of brutal ward cost there. Whenever you discard 1 or more cards, target creature gets +2/+0 until end of turn for each card discarded this way. Whenever that creature deals combat damage to a player this turn, draw a card. Like, this seems like a massive amount of damage if you're supporting any sort of like discard synergy. It does work with looters. It misses the time in on things like Malcolm, unfortunately, to work out well. I said that it goes nuts with Kitsa, but it kind of doesn't the way you really want it to, because you have to tap Kitsa to do the looter thing. But it is nice to be able to go like, okay, attack with Kitsa after it's already attacked because it has vigilance, loot, give it +2/+0. And the thing that catches me on this is like, it's not once per turn, right? It's for each card discarded, give +2/+0. So you could cast like a Faithless Loot and give something +4/+0.
Yeah.
This is kind of massive.
draw a card.
Yeah, and then if you hit with that creature, you draw the card back. Like that seems insane to me if this is supported in any meaningful way. I looked through our blue section. I didn't look through red. I know there's stuff like Inti, which is kind of nuts with this, but I looked through blue and there's like 3, maybe 4 ways to actually discard cards in a way that like actually works with this profitably. But it is really cool to have like Lorien Revealed and use it as a +2/+0 combat trick. Go get your island and then also draw a card off of it with a Howler.
This hits me like the kind of card that is like this just appeals to the whatever budding commander brains in me, man. I just want to like turn cards sideways and kill people because they chose to dirtle for 5 turns, and I just like discard. We're just playing discard aggro. Let's go.
Also, it's a cool shark, dude.
It is very cool. This card's got sick drip. Look at that cape hanging out with the fin poking out of it.
Yeah, and the fucking
cool.
the pantaloons on this dude. He's like firing a laser blaster at something. There's like a thopter.
He's calling his shot too. Look at him. He's like pointing. He's like, yeah, you're toast,
going
kid.
down. You're fucking toast. Actually, you know what? Now that we're talking about this card, there was a while back, Teld and I were talking about maybe designing, because some people get a little mainline cube fatigue because there are some like thematic strains in it, but mostly it's focused on like a lot of cross-compatible powerful cards. And we thought that there maybe would be like a market for or some interest in like a rare power level cube that was sort of built in like a let's do a more thematic type cube thing, but with rares. And one way that you can do blue-red that's not just straight up spells is there's actually a really high density of blue-red cards that filter the shit out of your deck. And this could be a cool signpost for that.
Oh, dude, play that Flameblade Adept, and like you play it with like your Mischievous Mystics. It's like blue-red discard aggro. I'm into it.
The set also has a 1-mana 1/1 that gets +1/+1 counters whenever you discard a card, which is not something worth mentioning here because again, it doesn't really fit the overall design of our cube or anything like that. But that's a powerful card if you're supporting like any sort of like that's the thing with Captain Howler is I bet you just first off it's a 4-mana 5/4 with double ward abilities, so like it kind of is just fine if you get incidental stuff, but you do need some sort of extra like intentional support, I think, to justify using a cube slot on it. And same goes for any of those other like pseudo cycle and discard payoffs in this set.
Speaking of cycling, yeah, obviously you cycle a card, you draw a card, and then you give a creature a buff, you hit them, and like you just go up a card that way pretty easily. One of the easiest ways to break parity on this card, or like break the like not break it, but like get value out of this card is just cycling.
Yeah. So this was my this card is super friggin' cool, but probably doesn't work for us addition to the list.
I just want to mention real quick, but I've noticed that like the shark people, they all seem to care about discard, and I'm wondering if the flavor is like you're throwing stuff to the sharks.
Maybe.
Like, do you know what I'm saying? Like you're like just tossing stuff overboard to the sharks, like you're tossing, whatever. Anyway, this next card.
This card's exhausting.
Yeah, this card's exhausting. I'm gonna read it. Loot the Pathfinder. I would like more 3-colored cards that kind of feel like they bind the 3-color shard or wedge or whatever together, and this kind of just does a bunch of generically powerful things, but I am a little...
This is the most teamer card that ever teamered, dude.
It is the most teamer card that ever teamered. Okay, so Loot the Pathfinder is 2 green, blue, red for a 2/4 legendary creature, Beast Noble. I'm not really sure why his creature type is Noble, but double strike, vigilance, haste. I mean, good keywords.
Yeah.
And then it has 3 exhaust abilities, so you can only activate each one of them once per game. Thank God, because if you could do these an infinite number of times, it would be insane. The first one is green tap, add 3 mana of any color. The second is blue tap, Ancestral Recall. And the third is red tap, Lightning Bolt. Basically a 5-mana double strike, vigilance, haste that has 1-time Ancestral Recall, Lightning Bolt, and Dark Ritual on it, essentially.
Okay, I have some complaints about this card. Mechanically, I understand why it has vigilance, but like, vigilance is a white mechanic, right? And like, where is it getting double strike from? Okay, double strike is a red thing, but also haste is a red thing. These are not 3 different keywords from 3 different colors.
Oh, you know what? No. Blue is like tertiary in vigilance now, so that's probably what they're doing there.
I don't know that this combination of keywords is a Naya combination of keywords.
It is. In fact, doesn't the Samut
Samut has the exact same spread.
Yeah. This is okay. There's so much going on with this card. Like, if you pass and you're able to have, I mean, obviously, like you're probably not going to have actual teamer mana up when you play it. you're going to have to pick 1 or 2 colors to kind of represent on your 6-drop. But I mean, if you hold up green, you can either hold up a cycle for like the dinosaur, you can hold up Tyvar Stand to protect the loot, you could play a 3-drop instead, so then you've played your 5-drop that they have to answer and a 3-drop in the same turn. Being able to hold up blue and draw 3 cards is completely ridiculous for the, you know, if you're able, but I think you probably want to untap before you draw cards, if I'm guessing. But like just holding up the red for Lightning Bolt too is going to represent quite a bit of annoyance, right? Like you can attack your opponent. If they block, you're going to destroy them with Lightning Bolt mode. It's like a face-up combat trick, so they can't really block.
This can eat a 5/5 that blocks it with that Lightning Bolt plus double strike.
Yeah, plus it holds back the fort, and like if your opponent goes to remove it, if you hold up, for example, blue-red, you just like, all right, well, I'll either kill your best thing or like the best thing I can kill for 3 damage. Or I'll draw 3 cards if we're in a game where like attrition really matters. I mean, this card is like, the last couple of loots, I'm like, all right, whatever. At least this card's terrible, so I don't have to look at it. This card is like kind of cracked out. I mean, and then this has the hidden mode too. If you can just play it on 5 mana, if you like really need a 5-drop, there's a pretty okay 5-drop most of the time.
Here's the question. Are you ever running it out on turn 5? Like, are you just tapping out to run it out?
If you've got nothing else to do and other cards to play, sure.
I think for me, it depends on how many resources are left in my opponent's hand. I think if you're playing a teamer deck with a bunch of really good creatures in it, there's a decent chance you've exhausted your opponent's hand of removal before you play this.
Yeah, because you're playing green cards. And green cards, that's funny.
You match my exhaust.
I did not do that on purpose. Let the record show I am not like these other degenerates. I did not do that on purpose.
The thing about teamer too is that this is this is like the Simic thing, right? If like every card I play is a banger. Every creature I play is just going to be primo. And then I've got loot on top of all that after you've run out of removal to bury you.
Yeah, I mean, if you're playing a deck that's like a handful of dorks and then like the best green, blue, and red, and blue can meaningfully contribute to what I'm about to say meaningfully now because the creatures have gotten great. If you're just playing like a teamer mid-range deck with all of the best creatures you could get your hands on and dorks, like basically everything is going to be like, okay, well, I got to do something about that. I got to do something about that. I got to do something about that. And then if you exhaust your opponent's hand of removal, get in a double strike attack with this, and then you untap, and it's like, cool, well, I guess if you remove it, I'll just Ancestral Recall or whatever.
Also, this card is like kind of cracked out in multiple ways with Tyvar Stand Repulsive Mutation, like in the same colors, mind you. But double strike just amplifies the fireball mode on those cards so much.
The green mode is like the least desirable mode here, but that can also just pump up a Tyvar Stand for like 2 extra points of damage or whatever. So yeah, I don't know how often you're actually using the green mode for like a huge advantage, but it is something extra to do with it.
I think the green mode's probably going to come up when you play this for 6, and like you play this out, and then post combat you green mode it to play a 3-drop.
Sure.
The digital gremlin art is so bad, and the worst part is there is a sick Japanese showcase art that is actually cool and would actually have me like be like, oh yeah, I'm down for this. And they could have used that as the base art, and it would have looked awesome. It's got like big Speed Racer vibes, and it makes loot look like not a CGI gremlin.
Yeah, the art composition here is just weird. It's like half the card is loot.
Yeah, what is it avoiding? Like the Duskborn hand, and also like if you're gonna make this the flagship character of your Death Race set, like he should have a badass vehicle.
Give him a gun.
Yeah, isn't one of the we can't have guns. Remember, we can have thunder cannons or whatever they're called. But we can't have guns.
Give him a corn cob that looks like a gun.
Loot the Glocketeer.
Isn't one of the like rules of isn't one of the rules of art generally when you're like trying to center a piece on a character, you should have it be like in the middle of the pane or something? Like,
did you see that sandworm I posted in the chat the other day or yesterday? There's a common sand. I'll save it for the peasant episode, but they did not do that art justice. They cropped it in such a terrible way that like. Anyway, yeah, the loot art is very weird here. Do you guys want to get into Gear Hulk Central here?
Yeah, we actually had to talk about all 5 of them because they're all great.
Not all of them are going to make the cut for us, but I think that they're all worth discussing.
Yeah, sure. Maybe that's a better way of putting it.
Just overall, the Gear Hulks are all artifact creatures. They all this time around they're all 2-color Gear Hulks, and they all have CCDD mana costs, so they're a little bit mana intensive, not very splashable. The first one is Coal Stoke Gear Hulk. This is 1 black, red for a 5/4 with Menace and Death Touch. And when it enters, put target creature card with mana value 4 or less from a graveyard. I didn't realize it was any graveyard.
We're learning as we go. We can hit opponent's cards. Cool.
Yeah, from a graveyard onto the battlefield under your control with a finality counter. That creature gains Menace, Death Touch, and Haste, and at the beginning of your next end step, exile that creature. So not a lot of ways to work around exile end of turn and a finality counter. They really didn't want that creature coming back, but now that I know this is any graveyard, that's actually a nice little piece of graveyard hate, too, if you need it to be. Like,
it is.
Your opponent has a stupid Detective's Phoenix in the graveyard, you could just snipe it, get a hit in, and exile it permanently, or even a Croxa or something. Yeah. Although you're playing Colstoke Gremlin, you're probably the Croxa player. Just this is just a lot of stats and value. If you get back any sort of ETB creature, you get even extra value off of it. Plus Menace, Death Touch on a 5/4 for 5 mana. Like, that's not super broken, but it is pretty strong.
Yeah,
Fantastic
this
art.
card seems good. Got great art. Yeah, I think the biggest downside to this card is that maybe you guys disagree, but I sort of feel like Rakdos is probably the single most contested, the most stacked gold section that we could possibly have. Like, even if the cards we're not playing, there's stuff like Rakdos, the 6 mana one from MKM, the 5 mana one from OTJ. There's Jasper Flint. There's a laundry list of probably 6 or 7 cards we could be playing in the Rakdos section that we aren't playing, and this one has to compete against the best of the best. And like, it's definitely worse than Prosper. And it's a 5
take Prosper away from the people. They don't deserve it anymore.
But yeah, so that's not anything that this card did wrong, but it's just that if this kind of effect was like this powerful of an effect was in basically any other color pair, I would be kind of down for it, because I think most of the other color pairs just aren't quite as stacked as Rakdos.
We could easily at some point just like decide to test this, and it would be great. It's just the thing with gold cards is, like, once you start getting into expensive gold cards, there are a lot of good monocolor expensive cards as well. So if you're just jamming like all of the best 5-drops you can get your hands on, a 2-color 5-drop is probably going to be better than a monocolored 5-drop, but maybe not meaningfully enough that you don't want to play like a more unique kind of effect in the section. But yeah, incredible. I really love that this has like 4 smokestacks coming out of it. I'm not crazy about the color they chose for the spotlights, but the art itself is awesome.
Yeah. It's worth noting too with these CCDD cards, we've seen it with Hugs and Kogla and Yadaro. It's kind of nice sometimes to have a few of those, because you'll get a card like this like 12th pick sometimes, and not have to necessarily 3rd pick it if you're in red-black. Up next, is the general excitement level about this one high enough someone else wants to take it, or?
This is Riptide Gearhulk. It's 1 white, blue for an artifact creature construct, 2/5 with double strike and prowess for some reason.
Yeah, weird on a blue-white card, kind of, but...
All right, and it has, when this creature enters, for each opponent, put up to 1 target non-land permanent that player controls into its owner's library third from the top. So this, in a 1v1 setting, is going to come down, kill your opponent's best card. It allows you to get rid of cards like the Great Hinge, allows you to get rid of Banishing Light effects for long enough that you can get some sort of major advantage off of it while it's gone. On top of that, Double Strike plus Prowess is really, really silly, especially if somehow... I'm not sure you're ever going to be able to do this, but if you were somehow able to get green or red into your deck to play a powerful combat trick, it gets really, really silly with this card.
But just on its range, Celestial Mantle this bad boy, give it +3/+8 hit for 10 in the air.
Cooking. This card's just like kind of obscene, and that's just in 1v1. When we get to the Commander Tank episode of the podcast, we can talk about how this is really broken with flicker effects and interacts with all 3 opponents at once, and it's going to turn you into the arch enemy immediately.
This card is messed up, but I'm happy about it because it's white, blue. There was a world where they could have made this easily splashable or whatever, but the restriction on it, I think, justifies the power level.
Also, luckily, the entire Gearhulk cycle is mythic rare, because, like, man, these are going to be beatings in limited.
Yeah.
They did a really good job with naming these, I think.
Yeah, blue. I mean, they had a pretty good convention for them. It was just like blue-white Gearhulk, blue word plus white word plus Gearhulk, red-green Gearhulk, red word plus green word plus Gearhulk. So they all have cool names. They all have cool effects. Like, this one, I think, is the best of them. It's just Noxious Gearhulk for 1 less mana, and it kills your opponent extremely quickly if you have any sort of spell backup.
This falls into the same kind of problem that we were talking about with Colstoke Gearhulk, though, which is, once you start getting up into the higher mana values, a lot of the monocolored cards are really strong, maybe not as strong as this, but really strong. And then, obviously, there's Teferi, Hero of Dominaria. If you're playing a 360, you really only have but so much room for expensive cards, unless you're like deliberately playing a cube where like the game doesn't start until turn 3. So, yeah, these expensive cards, there tends to be some competition, but this one is very strong. Okay, Pyrewood Gearhulk, we're definitely replacing Kogel and Yudaro with this card.
Get off my plane!
If it had Dinosaur on it, he'd be all into it.
Yeah, 100%.
No, I really do just hate this effect. Like, I think this card.
No. I get you. I'm mostly just joking around. This card is very fucking strong, though. This card is Pyrewood Gearhulk. It is 2 red, green, so a total of 6 for a 7/7 with Vigilance and Menace, which is a great combination of keywords on a huge creature. And when this creature enters, other creatures you control get +2/+2 and gain Vigilance and Menace until end of turn. And for whatever reason, damage can't be prevented this turn.
Yeah,
I guess it's like so you can't get fogged.
Suck it.
You
the
get
one ring.
One ring. Yeah, one ring can suck it.
Okay, maybe that's what it is. Okay, so this is cheaper than the typical green effects like Crater Hoof and stuff, and Raise Forerunners that do these kind of effects. I think Enrace Forerunners does give Vig, but this also gives Menace, and it costs 1 less. Card strong.
The big difference being that this doesn't contribute to the combat step the turn it comes down, whereas most of those like 8 mana plays have haste.
They have haste, yeah.
True, but 2/2 Vig and Menace is crazy.
Yeah,
like,
that's strong.
Like any of these effects, if you accelerate into it with elves, it's not very good because your elves are tapped. But if you're playing a Gruul deck where you just go like good 2, good 3, good 4, good 5, your opponent just kind of dies.
Yeah, so my big problem with this card is that it sort of has the classic big dumb green card of like, if you're in a sort of protracted game state where both players have some cards in play, you just win the game on the spot because your creatures now just are just giant army of giant creatures that have menace. But if you're against a control opponent, this is oftentimes going to be expensive card that gets countered or expensive card that like doesn't meaningfully contribute because you had to use your elves for mana and you don't have a bunch of other cards in play because your opponent's playing interaction. So it's kind of like polarizing in that sense, and that it's like definitely less good against control. And compared to, this is not like my defend Kogel and Yudaro session, but like Kogel and Yudaro being able to come down and get your control opponent post Wrath and give it haste and smack them in the face for 7 is pretty meaningful. So I think this card like creates worse game state or like play patterns. I think it's going to feel worse to play against while also being like a little more polarized in what it does as opposed to just being generically applicable. So I'm not a huge fan of the effect. I think it's cool for Commander where, it allows you to kill the one ring player or whatever. But yeah, in terms of just what it does for our cube game state, I feel like it's going to be a really miserable card if you include it.
Yeah, but look how cool it is.
It is very cool. If you're wondering if this is powerful enough for your sort of like contemporary Magic design fair cube, it probably is. The next two are less good.
Yeah, exactly. The next two are like more specific to like archetypal stuff and thematic stuff. So these two are ones that like we're not going to consider for our cube, but
I do want to talk about the Dimir one.
Okay.
Interesting.
Let's go ahead and do the Selesnya one real quick, because this one doesn't fit our design at all, but it is a strong card.
Yeah, this is actually my favorite of the cycle. It just doesn't fit what we're doing.
I usually do like sci-fi cityscapes for my computer background, but I think I'm going to try to find the full art of this and run this as my background for a while, because this is like up there with like my favorite pieces of Magic art of like all time. This art is incredible.
Yeah, Jose Parodi, is that how you say it?
Yep.
Knocked
it out of the park.
Big shout out. He accomplished the mission here. This was good.
Yep. It looks slick and futuristic, but the art is so clearly organic at the same time. Yeah. Like they Jose crushed this art.
Yeah, you can like see the growth, the like green tree growth on the bottom part of the card, and like just
combined
really,
with the
really
solar
cool.
panels.
Also, I will say. I'm really mad about this art as well, though, because this was one of the first pieces we got spoiled for this entire set, and it gave me the entirely wrong impression of what I could expect out of this set.
Well, yeah, no, this is the best art of the set. Who knows? This could be the best art of the year. It's going to be hard to top this. But in any case, it's a bummer that it's probably the least generically playable because it is the coolest looking, and it's not even close. Should read the card. Bright Glass Gearhulk is green, white for a 4/4 with First Strike and Trample, which is a very good body. First Strike and Trample. It's a very good body, especially in a color combination where you can easily make the card bigger. The effect, though, is when this creature enters, you may search your library for up to 2 artifact, creature, and or enchantment cards with mana value 1 or less, reveal them, put them into your hand, and then shuffle. So this is obviously not the same card. I think we'd be looking at this a lot more closely if it was like up to that many permanents with up to mana value 2. So you could go get a 2-drop. In our cube, like in green, you're getting elves, and in white, you're getting Thraben inspectors. You know, that's not really like a payoff, unfortunately. Where I do think this card really has the potential to shine is if you are running a cube with either a strong artifact or enchantment theme or both, because your Mishra's Bauble, Portable Hole, Shaper's Sanctuary, stuff like that. You know, like those utility 1-drop artifacts and enchantments. Being able to go and tutor up 2 of those is probably crazy in those environments. And I'm jealous because you'll get to play this card.
Yeah, getting to tutor up something like even like a Rancor could be pretty good. Yeah, I really like this card's design, but I do agree. I think a lot of the best cards you can fetch are cards that are not particularly cubable. They're like really important engine-y cards. But if you're playing this in cube, I think you probably want to be playing like some number of the green Hydras, though unfortunately some of the best ones have more than 1 converted mana cost or mana value. Cards like Macaeus the Lunarch, I don't know if that card still holds up, but if you're playing that kind of card, it allows you to tutor it. Portable Hole, as you mentioned, I think. So there's a lot of cards you can go get
Authority
with this.
Of the consoles.
Yeah, there are a lot of good cards to go tutor off this. I think one of the more awkward things about it is I think the best cards you could probably tutor are black cards. Just like cards like Tortured Existence and cards like well, that was the one that immediately jumped. Deathray Shaman is another one that immediately jumped out.
In higher power cubes, you can go get like Mom and Hex Drinker and shit like that. So that might be worth considering. But we don't play cards like that.
Because this is Ranger of Eos, right? If you're just getting creatures, Ranger of Eos is a 4-mana 3/2, so you're bumping up the restrictive mana cost, but you're getting an insane body by comparison. And the flexibility of also getting artifacts and enchantments and stuff like that. So this can get like Urza's Saga, right? Like it's a 0-mana enchantment, things like that.
Oh,
so,
yeah.
Once you start getting into like broken card territory with Soul Ring and whatnot, like this gets probably much better though. In those environments, you're playing Selesnya and 4-mana 4/4 first strike trample is a lot less meaningful there. So there's a little bit of back and forth. The higher up you go, the better the targets, but the worse the body. So for us, you're probably just getting a handful of Thraben inspectors. You know, you don't really want to go get dumb Llanowar elves or whatever.
No, if we were still playing like Stepmom or whatever, like I said, if we were playing Hex Drinker, like those things where like the 1-mana card that you're getting is worth way more than 1 mana, then yeah, now we're talking. So this breaks my heart a little bit. I really wanted this to be good enough for us, but it just doesn't really fit our environment.
Yeah. Love this card. Adore tutors, but yeah.
Okay, so the next card, do either of you want to take it, or do you want
No,
me to
I'm interested in what you have to say about it.
I think that this is probably like the weakest, and I think in our environment it's better than Bright Glass, but I think in terms of its general applications across Magic, it's probably weaker. This is Oil Deep Gearhulk. It is blue, black for a creature for a 4/4 with lifelink and Ward 1. I wish they had gone Ward 2 on this, to be honest with you.
Ward 1 is a nuisance. It's not actually like...
It's not a huge problem.
It's not a selling point, yeah.
Yeah, and then when this creature enters, you look at target player's hand. You may choose a card from it. If you do, that player discards that card, then draws a card. If this just straight up thought seized, it would probably be kind of busted. However, I will say this. If you are reaching into your opponent's hand and you are grabbing the card that like answers this, or you are grabbing like the card that they're going to play that you're going to have difficulty tangling with, there's a 40% chance they're going to draw a land. So I do like that it's disruptive. It's always important to remember that when you disrupt your opponent's hand, you also get to see your opponent's hand, which is meaningful. I don't know that the combination of keywords on this is particularly good.
Lifelink is almost always undervalued. It almost always plays out much stronger than it reads.
Yeah, that's true.
I will say one other thing, and I don't know if you said this, I apologize, but you can also look at your own hand to fix your draws if you're a little flooded.
I guess it does do... Oh, yeah, it does the V-click thing. Yeah.
Yeah, you can target yourself. These effects... So I like Conceal and Curtain because it's like an actual aggressive body. V-click can actually beat down, but I will note this whole, like, take an opponent's card and replace it with a random card in 2025 just doesn't seem to work out the way you want it to, because everyone's cards are so powerful that, like, you might take the best card in their hand, but they're just going to draw, like, yeah, they might draw a land or whatever, but they're just going to draw another powerful card to replace it. So
I don't agree. I'm going to push back a little on that. I mean, I do agree all of the cards are powerful, but I think one of the things I've noticed with powerful cards, and this is part of why like cards like Tyvar Stand have jumped up so high in our pick order, is that the power level of the specific effects you're running, like those unique effects like Wrath, like Tyvar Stand, like Monstrous Rage, or Embercleave type effects, those are much better than like all the other cards in your deck, right? Like those are your really top end like cards that have, and usually they're situational, but like the really situationally powerful cards are like those are totally fine to get rid of, and like getting rid of them probably increases your win rate by quite a bit. So I agree the cards are generically powerful, but also like Chris said, they're 40% chance to go draw a land.
I think there's an argument there. I think downgrading a 9 to a 8 is not like a significant enough to play a body like this. Like that effect is fine. Like being able to downgrade a card in your opponent's hand, especially if it's just like the best card in their deck or whatever, is fine. But like you have to also get reasonable stuff on top of that effect. And I would disagree with your pushback there that like taking the Monstrous Rage and downgrading it to like Lightning Strike or something, like they still have a Lightning Strike in hand. They're going to get good value off of that.
I think my biggest dislike of this card is its sorcery speed. Like 4 mana sorcery speed we talked about with Moob, that's just a little sketchy in
this
blue
effect's
decks.
Obnoxious at instant speed though.
Oh,
yeah,
I'm
no,
not saying
if this
it should have had
flash,
flash. I'm just saying that the fact that it doesn't does make it a substantially worse card.
Chris, I do wonder, they printed Grief like X number of years ago. I do wonder if this could have just been a Thoughtseize like at this cost, like at such a prohibitive cost.
Yeah, I think I understand why they didn't make it a Thoughtseize, because if it's just a straight up 2-for-1 your opponent's best card. Teld, didn't you say somebody commented that they'd nerfed this a little bit because blue-black has been so strong in Standard recently? Was that confirmed, or was that your theory?
That's what I've heard, is that this card was nerfed because they recognized they had pumped in a ton of really powerful blue-black cards, but that might have just been like an internet
They said on stream, on the reveal stream, they said that this was one of the Gear Hulks that they intend to see constructed Standard play. Like, this is one of the highlight cards that they're hoping actually makes a space for itself in Standard.
Well, here's my deal. It's probably just because I have like a hard-on for hand disruption. Speaking of hard-ons, the next card is very
I was going to make the same joke you got. But
maybe it's just because like I have a really serious soft spot for hand disruption. But this strikes me as the type of card that could like read as potentially a little underwhelming and then actually perform really well. So I would like to try it, especially considering that the new Kaito hasn't really worked out that well, and I find the original Kaito to be a little bit boring. So, yeah, we'll see. This could be good enough. I lean more towards Teld's view. So, okay, I don't want to spend too much time because we're running long, but the decks where getting the card out of your opponent's hand that you can't beat is really strong, and then the decks where every single one of their cards is the same tend to be aggressive decks where, like, the lifelink is really going to shine. So, yeah, I don't know. I think this could be good. I want to see what it does. But let's talk about the fucking anime titty frog. This is Sab Sunin, Luxa embodied. 3 green blue, 6/6. Reach, trample, indestructible. Can't attack or block unless it has an even number of counters on it. There's reminder text. 0 is in fact even. At the beginning of your first main phase, you put a +1/+1 counter on it. Then if it has an odd number of counters on it, you draw 2 cards. So you play it, and it is a 6/6 reach, trample, indestructible with 0 counters, so it can block. It has reach, so it can block anything. It has indestructible, so it will eat basically anything. And then the next turn, you put a +1/+1 counter on it. It can't attack, but you draw 2 cards. And then the next turn, you untap, it becomes an 8/8, and it has reach, trample, and indestructible, and you can fucking smork. So this card is crazy. I think this card is crazy.
My only real note here, because the card is obviously just very powerful, is I think this is an awesome callback to Bounty of the Luxa, which was that enchantment that alternated between drawing a card and making extra mana each turn, and this is Luxa embodied, so like the alternate in between being a giant god that can contribute in combat versus drawing cards but not contributing to combat, like it's a nice little callback to that enchantment. Plus if you can do like, if you can either do counter manipulation or proliferation type stuff, there is a world where you could draw cards and attack and block with this during the same turn.
Well, this card gets really silly with like ordinary Tumblewag or Luminar Gasper, right? Because you put the counter on it, draw your card, you put the counter on it, you attack, and then like next turn you do the same thing and you just loop it, and like every turn you're just getting bigger and attacking.
Yeah, I didn't realize this drew 2 cards each alternate turn, which makes sense. But yeah, this is very powerful. The thing that sells me on it is that it can block the turn it comes down. It's essentially like it is a delayed divination for your next turn that also probably holds the fort the turn it comes down unless it gets exiled. It can't attack the following turn, but you get to untap with 2 extra cards in hand. And then after that, it's 7/7 that can bash if you need to bash.
Yeah, the thing is too is there's just so many cards that manipulate counters now in our cube that like I feel like this card's gonna attack and draw cards in the same turn more often than we probably want to acknowledge, and it is big.
Oh, Bristly Bill.
To have the flavor win, this card is thick. It is gonna be like an 8/8 when it attacks.
Yeah,
God.
Bonnie Paul type cards here, big Simic nonsense cards. Honestly, this is a little more nuanced than Bonnie Paul because sometimes you won't actually be able to block with it. But
man, they really managed to get like the Anthro freaks and the Giantess freaks with the same card. They knew exactly what they were doing. All joking aside, the art is very cool. It just makes me uncomfortable. Speaking of which, if you guys start coming out and playing the JDG cube more often, we're gonna know why. Okay, so proceed with caution. All right. So next card, I think this was a Teld edition.
Oh yeah, this is Scarabeo Sturzorario. I have no idea what its English name is. It's a 2 black green 6/6 vehicle. And it has trample, and when it ETBs, it drains 3, and it has crew 2. And I only have it on here because this is a rare.
Debris Beetle is the name of the card. Debris Beetle.
Debris Beetle, yes. It's a dung beetle. My only reason for putting this on here is it gives me the feeling in the pit of my stomach. We're not getting Siege Rhino at uncommon in Tarkir, are we?
No, but I have my money bet on it already. So honestly, we're just printing this sort of card at rare. I don't see why Siege Rhino can't be uncommon, but boring. But I think it's probably
very
just good.
boring. I mean, I think it's too boring for us to consider playing. But I think
I don't want to consider it. This was more of just me because I've been banking on the Siege Rhino and uncommon, and I don't know why this card just kind of made me be like, they're not going to do that, are they?
Also, how embarrassing would it be to get trampled over by a gigantic ball of poop?
I think there was a missed opportunity to make this a rhinoceros beetle for the Siege Rhino joke. But
oh, dude, man, they are dropping the ball left and right.
Yeah. We've only got 3 cards left. Actually, one of the cards left is the cycle of Verges, and I just wanted to, I guess, use this as an opportunity to check in on the Verges again and see how we feel about them because we're going to have the full cycle of 10 now.
I don't like the
I don't really like this cycle nearly as much.
Why? Because loot's on all of them?
Loot's on all of them.
There's alternate art, isn't there?
Probably.
Yeah, there's alternate in fact, Fibblethip, Cowboy Fibblethip is on one of the alternate arts.
Yeah, but see, now I'm going to have to go spend gold or gems on the alternate arts, which I'm going to do, but also I'm mad about it.
Yeah, but the Verges have played out pretty well, right? I do think it's kind of annoying where sometimes, and it's user error, it's like literal actual definition of skill issue, but like if you don't play on Arena and you're holding like Willow Rush Verge in your opening hand, it will highlight the card as if it's a blue-green land, which can sometimes trick you into thinking you have blue and green mana in situations where you won't, but like you just have to kind of actually evaluate whether your Verges are going to tap for the correct mana or not. But overall, like skill issue aside, these have been a pretty good land cycle.
They are a good land cycle, and I'm not as annoyed by the loot stuff, but I am annoyed here because the arts, they're lands that are clearly like the entire art direction of what the land is supposed to look like is just highlighting like, oh, did you know loot like walks between planes? And land art
doesn't actually do that. Loot is like a GPS for the omen paths, apparently.
Oh, okay, whatever. I don't know. Magic lore is completely unimportant to me, but yeah, I don't like the art, but it's a good cycle.
I get all of my magic lore from Harold, so I assume he's telling me the truth.
Okay. He could just be lying to us. It seems like something Harold would do is just make stuff up, and then we go ahead and
we're just like a bunch of credulous dipshits.
You ever just somebody tells you something super interested, and you start telling your family like. You tell your family the same thing as if it's fact, and then you find out later it's just like complete bullshit. It's like, oh, oops.
I I will also say that I'm assuming the black-green Verge is also taps for black and makes green if you have a forest. I do think those specifically are probably a little worse, just marginally, for the cycle, because green decks tend to want green on turn 1, but they also tend to have
the Verge taps for green. It taps for black if you have a swamp or a forest. It can T1 elf. The blue-green one can't for whatever reason, but...
Yeah. That being said, I think blue-green's also a color that frequently gets away without having elves, because a lot of times it's a tempo deck. But, I mean...
Yeah, even in that case, like, it's still yeah, but, I mean, it's still a strictly better island. Like, you would be playing it in place of an island, not necessarily a forest, so... Two colorless cards to wrap things up here. Chrome Mox is not something we need to discuss so much as just, like, earmark it as a special guest card. That's a really big pickup for Timeless Cube. Not the type of card we... make room for or really even want in our mainline cube, but it is basically the only special guest card that's like a slam dunk this time around, and we really don't need to get into the art choices on the special guests because they are a little bit strange.
Just short Chrome Mox good, art on this card good.
I am so old that I was in a card shop when someone next to me opened a pack of Mirrodin and has an original print of this. Like, I have seen this card come out of a paper pack, because I'm that old.
I was really shocked to see how expensive Chrome Mox has gotten, because I used to have some, and, like, it is shocking to me how expensive it is.
Last card, the Headliner. I don't know if you guys know this or not, but there's this, Headliner is actually just a Magic term now. There's a single card per new release that's like the quote-unquote headliner of the set, and it's like the marketing is around it. They did it with Edgar Markov for Innistrad Remastered. We actually know what the next couple of headliners are going to be for the following sets, but the Aether Spark is the headliner for Aetherdrift, and I can actually feel my voice getting ready to go, so I'm going to let you guys read through it.
Yeah, so the Aether Spark is a 4-mana legendary artifact planeswalker equipment, and as long as it's attached to a creature, it can't be attacked, and has whenever the equipped creature deals combat damage during your turn, put that many loyalty counters on the Aether Spark. It starts at 4 loyalty. It has a +1 ability to attach it up to one target creature you control and put a +1 counter on that card. It has a -5 to draw 2 cards and a -10 to add 10 mana of any one color. So this card is one that is kind of hard to even parse. I know a lot of people have been suggesting that it's bad, but I think this is one that we're gonna have to play before we make any real judgments about it. Obviously, like 4 mana for a +1 counter is not very good, but this is the kind of card that has the potential to really pop off. Chris and I talked a little bit about it last night, and we were kind of the opinion that the card is probably most of the time going to be a green card, because one, green wants the value engine more, since we cut cards like Radagast. Sometimes they struggle with drawing extra cards. Two, green stats being bigger means that this card giving combat buffs and triggering off combat damage, not just to players, by the way, matters a lot more. Putting this on something like a Questing Beast or on like a Balustrade Worm is going to generate a ton of loyalty on this card, which is going to let you start converting it into drawn cards. The other thing that I think is really hard to parse about this card that we'll have to see when we play it is the turn you play this card. You play it, you equip it, presumably you attack to trigger the effect, and presumably your creature lives. You now have a tapped creature that your opponent has to kill before they can attack the Aether Spark. And once they kill it, they still have to be able to line up good attacks after spending mana on their removal spell through the rest of your blockers to attack into it, or else you get to attach it and we keep the same loop going. And I could find that might end up being really annoying to actually deal with. Obviously, it's soft to Planeswalker removal, artifact removal. You can kill it, attack it down, but I think this card's going to gain a lot of loyalty pretty quickly. And the draw to, like, if you can trigger the draw to, every turn, or every other turn, you're probably going to bury your opponents in cards pretty quickly. And we have a lot of room still in our colorless cards section of card, because there's just not a lot of good colorless cards on the client. So if this ends up being like even just a one deck kind of card, it might still be worth running. And I see a lot of upside on it. I could see it sucking as well, because it's just the kind of card that we haven't really seen before that's kind of hard to parse.
Yeah, I think this card's really cool. I mean, legendary artifact planeswalker equipment. It's nice to see that they're still finding ways to make stuff that we've never really seen before. Obviously, as you talked about, maximized on big dumb tramplers or big dumb flyers. I think it's just too cool not to try. colorless cards almost always fall into the it's really not good enough or wow, this is obnoxious, like the One Ring or Palantir. Yeah, this is a cool card. I think we should try it. It's so different that we're just going to have to see it in play before we can honestly assess it. I think taking a hard line on what this card is going to do and how good it is without playing it is basically an impossibility.
Yeah, could be busted, could be terrible. I have no idea. It's really hard to evaluate. It's not even the strongest colorless card in the set, I don't think, but the other one's a commander bait card, so we don't really need to discuss it here.
Teld, did you call out Stoneforge Mystic yet?
I didn't. Obviously, this is an equipment, so you can tutor it off Stoneforge Mystic. It is a little awkward with the card because you can get some mana savings flashing it in and getting it rolling a little early. But if you flash it in, you do have to use the +1 on your turn to equip it because Stoneforge doesn't automatically equip things. And so you do get some mana savings. You do get to like bypass some of your opponents, but you don't really get to like get any equity on like drawing cards immediately, right? And presumably if you're Stoneforging this out on like turn 2 or 3, you probably don't have a big creature in play to begin with, so could be like less good with Stoneforge than you might imagine. But if you're playing in some sort of green-white deck where, you know, you're playing this in like a Dissection Tools or this in a Maul and like you're playing some big dumb green dudes to suit up, could be good.
Okay, so hear me out. Let's just go Magic Christmas Land. Mana Dork into turn 2 Bloated Contaminator.
Into plus on this.
Turn 3, Ether Spark, equip, put a +1 counter on Contaminator. Yeah. Attack, hit for 5, put 5 counters on Ether Spark, proliferate up to 10. On turn 3, we -10 to make 10 mana, and we do whatever we can with the rest of our hand.
Wait, does proliferate add another 5 counters? It doesn't, does it?
No, but
No, that's 1. But we go up to 5, and then we hit with Bloated Contaminator. We go up to 10. We actually go up to 11, so we get to keep the Ether.
The Contaminator will put 5 counters on it because it dealt 5 damage.
Right.
I mean, that's Magic Christmas Land, and I you might not even have anything impressive to do with 10 mana there, but that is technically a turn 3. Like, we do see Bloated Contaminator on turn 2 some amount of the time.
Yeah, wow, that is kind of good. I was thinking a little more small ball of like, all right, we'll play Stoneforge and Malcolm, and then we'll like flash this in and equip it on Malcolm and gain 3 per turn or whatever. And that just seems really small ball compared to what you're talking about.
You know, somebody in Limited's going to play like the 3 mana 7 power dinosaur into this on turn 4 and be like, okay, attack for 7, -10, but whatever other. Yeah, so there's some really powerful lines, obviously, but we'll see what the use case is. But
this is a good curve into or out of Spellbinder too.
Yeah,
right, because you can Spellbinder and then just disrupt whatever is going to disrupt you, untapping, putting this on Spellbinder, attacking for 4, and just putting it up to 8 loyalty.
Yeah, as long as you're not horribly behind, this card has some strong stuff it could do, but it probably exacerbates being behind by like just not doing anything at all when you are behind. So
totally.
Even if it is like busted, there are probably enough times where it's terrible that it brings it back down. I'm not sure. Like you said, we'll have to play it.
Yeah, that's why I think it ultimately strikes me as a green card, is just that the green's the color that doesn't get behind very often. It's the color that leverages the stats on this, the card draw the best. So yeah, I think that'll probably, if it's good, be the most common home. Because I think other decks are going to run into like, we can't spend 4 mana and not really adding substantially to the board.
Yep.
Yeah.
So that wraps up the card review. Listeners at home can always let us know if they feel like we missed something, but that's actually quite a bit pulled out from a set that none of us are really that hot on. So to close things out with some overall impressions, I'll go first because I don't have much to say, but I really dislike this set, and this is coming from someone who normally doesn't mind the kind of like jokey, like cross-dimensional sets, but like I feel like we could have either focused on Amonkhet or done something really cool with Muruganda, or really focused on Avishkar. You know, if we warranted a big enough change with that plane to change its actual name, like maybe we could have done something with that. The whole like lump them all together and have this completely dissonant feel with these Amonkhet gods, but then also these goofy goblin racers that are blowing up these ghost pirates or whatever. It just doesn't work for me. The longer the preview season went on, just the less I liked the set. Some of the art is like just really, really bad or poorly cropped or like very strange choices. The mechanics are just kind of like nothing. Like we're never going to see max speed or start your engines ever again. So like we get to evaluate the cards, move on. Exhaust is not new. There are no interest in returning mechanics. I do think there's something cool about like a vehicle forward set. I think it got muddled a little bit by throwing mounts in the mix too, because if you read a lot of these cards, like especially in the uncommon slot, there's so much text on cards dedicated to like, oh, this vehicle becomes a creature, or if it's a mount, it becomes saddled, and like it all just reads as very inelegant. Like when you just have a block of text on a card that's just all related to like animated vehicles or whatever. So I'm not super into this set. I'm hoping like individual card quality gives it like a home in cube and stuff like that. I'm hoping the limited format feels novel and unique, given that it's a theme that hasn't really been explored before. But I'm not really into it, and I'll let Chris talk about the MDFC angle if you want to, because I feel like that was a missed opportunity, and that was an idea that you brought up when we heard about the vanilla creatures. But I do feel like there was an opportunity to use MDFCs to make this set kind of tick a little bit better, and it wasn't used here. So yeah, this is like 2 thumbs down for me as far as like flavor and mechanics and stuff go. But I'll be happy enough to play with the new cards.
Yeah, I was pretty hyped for just getting spoilers again after we've kind of had an extended period of very minimal interesting cards, with Foundations having not a lot for the cube, and then Pioneer Masters having even less. I kind of had the same thing going on that Tim did, where the longer the spoilers went on, the lower I got on it. Like, the trailer was awful. The art direction looked like a Hearthstone expansion. For every good piece of art that we talked about, there's like 5 pieces of art that I can't stand. And it felt like you definitely, whether it actually is AI or not, it definitely felt like the sort of AI overly processed digital art was so much more common on this than even in previous sets. And I don't know, the theming of just like a bunch of vehicles really got on my nerves. And you can talk about the MDFC thing to how that would have been potentially a way to rectify it. I think the speed mechanic is super boring. I almost never like these super mechanics. Like, they just don't really hit for me for the most part.
Miss. The whole mechanic is a miss.
Yeah.
Like maybe there's something cool with constructed there, but like we're just never going to see it again. It doesn't even feel right to have a speed mechanic that takes multiple turns to do something. Like, it's just a miss.
Yeah, and I feel like there were several cards from like the teaser that I got really hyped up about that just didn't really pan out. Namely, the 2 main ones being the white legendary vanilla creature. I really was hoping we would push into new ground with a 3/1 for 1. And then the other one was the dinosaur dragon mount. Like, how do you not make that a splashy, like, rare mythic? Like, I'm sorry. How do we name something dinosaur dragon mount and then make it an uncommon? And don't get me wrong, it's like a fine uncommon, but this was, I was really excited for that card, and then it ended up being a huge letdown.
Yeah, I share a lot of the concerns that have already been expressed. The analogy that I'll use is this. When you walk into a restaurant and the menu is 5 pages, you are not in a good restaurant. Because there is a 0% chance that they're doing all of those things well. Like, I want to see a 1-page menu. I want to see like 6 main course options, because I know that everything is getting absolutely fucking nailed, right? Like, you're going to a restaurant, you're not going to the fucking grocery store. Mom worked because it was telling this gigantic, apocalyptic, like, desperate scramble for the survival of the universe type epic story, and that's why Mom was functional. As a multiplane set, doing a multiplane set that only has 3 planes, 2 of those planes are based on real cultures, which creates an even more dissonant vibe, and then tossing a cameo bone into a Vanilla Matters set, and then you just print like 5 legendary uncommons that are just like overstated and don't have anything to do thematically with the main thrust of the set. Like, everything about this was a colossal fuck up. If you're going to do something as specific as like, hey, it's pod racing in Avishkar, do pod racing in Avishkar. Like, do that plane, do it well, fully flesh it out, and they just didn't do it. As Tim mentioned earlier, it's jarring to see the Amonkhet gods next to like Avishkar stuff, next to these like random dinosaurs, including like the whichever one it was we were calling the thick dinosaur. Really going hard on the sexual lizards in this set. Yeah, they just fucked a bunch of stuff up, I think, personally. I am still annoyed about the T-Rex. I'm only half joking. And one idea that I had that I think would have been a slam, speaking of the legendary vanilla creatures, is maybe you could make the argument that this isn't technically vanilla, but what I was hoping that they were going to do was they were going to print a cycle of legendary vanilla creatures that had, like, their signature race vehicle on the back as an MDFC. So, because in my mind, I was like, okay, so for Constructed, if they're going to try to do, like, vehicles aggro, you can put 4 of these in your deck, right? And when you draw multiple copies, like, you can either play, like, the vehicle, or you can play, like, the creature piloting its signature vehicle. Like, that to me seemed like a really cool opportunity, and that's not what they did. They just gave us 5 creatures from a plane that's barely featured and just adds to the art direction confusion. Not to mention the fact that the compressed kind of art direction space of mixing and matching all these different planes was further compressed by the fact that, for whatever reason, there was a higher percentage of bad art in this set than usual. And also, get this fucking AI slop out of my face. Like, I realize that this is the direction that we're going as a society because companies are fucking greedy, but, like, just get it out of my face. I don't know. Not for me.
I think one of the things that Tim pointed this out is, like, after you mentioned the whole MDFC thing, Tim kind of got on the, like, I think if there had been like 2 cycles of of commons that, or maybe even uncommons that were like the racer on one side, the pilot on one side, and then the vehicle on the other, it would have given the cards a lot of flexibility in the draft format. I think it would make a lot of these dissonant car themes work better because you would have more real estate to flesh out the 3 planes you're visiting instead of having to be like, all right, well, here's 2 vehicles from Avishkar and here's 2 pilots from Avishkar. They're in red, white. And, you could instead have that be two cards. And you have now 2 more spaces for fleshing out the kind of lore of the set. I think one of my biggest problems with this set ultimately is that we are getting like maybe 3 in-universe sets per year at this point. These sets need to rule. These sets need to be bangers and knockouts. Like, this can't happen unless, and this is where I'm going to jump back into conspiracy brain, unless the goal is to make these sets suck enough that people complain and then they can say, well, we're going to make more universes beyond instead, and we'll just limit the number of in-universe sets because you guys don't like them. And, I'm trying not to be that cynical about it, but I think this is probably just, we screwed up. This is a bad set. This is a terrible design or whatever. Terrible. And maybe and look, the same thing can happen that happened with Dustworm, where we're a little skeptical. Like, I'm much more than skeptical about this. Definitely 2 thumbs down, whereas Duskworm, I'm like, a little iffy. But Duskworm was such a good limited format that my opinion of a lot of those cards have changed over time. And I maybe that happens here. I just doubt it because the distaste I have for it is much stronger. And the limited format, Dustborn, like, going into it when we were reviewing it, I think I mentioned that I felt like it could end up being a great set. It looked like it had all the hallmarks of something that was really good. And I sort of don't feel that way about this set. This set I've got some serious concerns about. So I'm hopeful that the limited format is fun, but this is a big 2 thumbs down for me. This is a big miss.
Well, week 1, you're going to have people who have 10 vehicles in their deck and get run over, right? Until the data tells them not to do that or whatever.
Yeah, that's definitely going to happen. I also wonder, like, the set is chock full of multicolor bombs. There are a bunch of strong multicolor rares that we didn't talk about because they don't really get there for our style of cube, but they will be very good and limited. And I noticed, looking at the card file, that they are including the 2-mana tap lands in this set, and there's going to be the Cycle of Verges as well. So I wonder what the frequency of my opponent is, just, especially like if the mainline mechanics don't actually work that well. I wonder if, like, it's going to just come out that, like, soup gaming is going to be what ends up happening, like soup gaming bombs. I don't play enough limited to, like, predict that, but it seems like a possibility.
Especially with how loose all the themes are overall, it definitely feels like the kind of set that is open to that. The problem, of course, is going to be when your opponent is playing a very focused, aggressive deck and triggers starts their engine stuff early, gets to max speed, and then crushes you because you're dirtling. Which is actually what I'm afraid of. I'm afraid this set's going to be like, and I hope it won't be this bad, but I'm kind of afraid this set's going to end up being a very linear racing set like 1, where we're just blowing past each other with giant vehicles.
That would be thematically appropriate, though, right?
I guess.
My final note here is this was the first time we've seen these mashup sets a while. We saw it with Thunder Junction. People weren't super happy, and honestly, a lot of sets are just mashup sets now because of the whole Omen Path thing in the story or whatever. But
the Marvelification of Magic. Here's a bunch of legends, you fucking nerds.
Yeah, the problem is with this set, instead of being a bunch of characters on one plane, it's a bunch of planes with a bunch of characters, right? So with Thunder
one
Junction,
character loot.
Everybody wore a cowboy hat, so there was a thematic cohesion.
With Thunder Junction, you get to you get to kind of like explore the plain of Thunder Junction, the deserts, and all this good stuff. And right, but when you're jamming 3 different planes into one set, you just don't get to explore a lot of the cool things about those planes. So you miss out on one thing. A lot of people notice there are no dwarves in Aetherdrift, and that's a big part of.
That had to have been deliberate, right?
There's no Kari Zev. Like Kari Zev's not here. Ragavan's not mentioned.
Yeah.
Like these are characters you would expect to show up in a racing set and stuff like that. So like you're trying to jam too much stuff in one set to the point where you have to cut stuff out. Maybe it's not a good idea to jam those things into the same set. I feel like maybe we could have done just Amonkhet and Avishkar, and it would have been still a little bit weird, but like the Muruganda thing took up some design space that doesn't feel like it gels very well. It's just, here's dinosaurs, like, and it's like, okay.
And referencing the last episode we did, how do we miss Kari Zev and Ragavan in the
right
in the set? Like even if it's not like going full blown meme, just not including them at all in the racing set seems just really weird.
It's so easy to picture like Kari Zev in like a fucking hot rod, and like Ragavan with his giant goofy fucking goggles is like clinging to the hood and grinning like a maniac, like while the wind blows his cheeks open or something.
Oh,
like,
that would have been great. Yeah.
This is the I guess just real quick. This is the other thing that bothers me is like, this theme lends itself so well to doing so much sick art. You know, there's like American hot rod culture, there's American tattoo culture, there's Mad Max, there's all this stuff. Like, if they had just stuck to racing on Avishkar, they could have, like, the sub-themes and sort of the variation in the aesthetic could be drawn from, like, Teld and I were talking about F-Zero, like, one of the like alternate arts is clearly a reference to F-Zero. You could have done some F-Zero shit. Like,
I wanted a Twisted Metal crossover.
Yeah, like a Twisted Metal thing would have been cool.
Yeah, more speed racer references. Just like really slam it all in and really focus in on like, okay, this is the goofy racing set. And like, I would have probably been okay with that. And it would have, I mean, like some of the art, I still would have, obviously we need to touch up some of those art. But like, I think if we just had goofy racing set on, Avishkar to show off the new plane, and like, maybe there's a surprise appearance with the Omen pads where like we take a brief detour through Amonkhet because like, and Bazooket shows up or something, whatever. If they felt the need to do that, I felt like it needed to be primarily centralized on the Avishkar Kaladesh plane, and then really make anything else that shows up is more just a cameo rather than like half the set's real estate.
Oh, you know what this feels like? In Avengers Endgame where
No, I don't, because I've never seen one of those movies.
Okay, but you've probably seen the scene somewhere online where all the characters come back to life and start stepping through the portals. Like the first one is Black Panther steps through and the crowd goes wild because Black Panther.
That's what references in Invasion of New Phyrexia from Mom, right? It's like they're stepping through the portal and all that. Yeah.
And then like you start seeing all the cool characters come through. Aetherdrift feels like that, but instead of Black Panther coming through the portal, it's like Moon Knight. And like the next character that comes out is like Echo or something, like just all these C-rate characters that nobody gives a shit about. It's like Bossery comes out and it's like, I guess thanks for the help. Like
it's like remember that throwaway planeswalker from 10 years ago? Yeah, you like that guy, right?
He does cat stuff now. He's a crazy cat guy. So yeah, suffice to say, not huge on the flavor and aesthetic of Aetherdrift, but it seems like we got quite a bit to talk about. The high power level overall, I think, and we're gonna go ahead and do a peasant review with Danelius soon after this, so stay tuned for that as well. But just to close us out, check out our socials on Twitter at JankDiverGamin, YouTube.com/JankDiverGamin, and find Teld streaming on Twitch.tv/TeldTalks, TELD Talks. Next episode outside of the peasant review, not sure yet. We'll have to talk about that. We've got at least a couple months before the next set. Plenty of time to get some cube-related content under our belt. So buckle up, folks. Hope you enjoyed the review, and let us know what you think of the set. I know there are some people who are really excited for Aetherdrift, so let us know what you think of the cards, and we will catch you all next time.
Before we get into the card, I just want to talk about the art. The art is very cool, but it's basically like a woman with like a dump truck ass in golden armor. She has a loincloth, and like one of the legs is specifically like, check out my leg, angled around the skimpy loincloth, so you're like a millimeter from frog pussy.
And then your eyes drift up and you see the frog face. You're like,
and then there's just like a frog head, and then there's just like a crowd, like a crowd full of adulation. They all want to mount the frog. They all want to gang up on the frog. They want to come all over the frog. There's a rainbow. There's literally like white fluid like raining from the frog's arms. It's insane. Like this card to me is like a recognition of just how weird the world has gotten. You know, like I'm sure you guys have seen the drawings on the internet of like jetliners with huge tits. Like this, like we're entering the age of incoherence. This is like all kinds of fucked up. It's incredible.
If I'm trying to give them a little bit of grace on this card, it's clearly meant to be like a fertility goddess, which was pretty common in like
they didn't have to do like the high slit like hot woman from a 1950s movie like check out this thigh like what is this?
It is like this is one of those ones that's like, why is this card drawn to be so like this card is clearly meant to be sexy, right? Like it's clearly meant to be like, ribbit. Oh look at this ribbit.
Yeah, the guy in the art like that's just to the left of her leg is clearly like one of those freaks who's like trying to get stomped on by a hot woman. He's like way too close for comfort. He's either trying to get stepped on or he's trying to get like under that skirt. It's not clear. But Jesus Christ. Okay, so let's talk about the cum frog. In addition to having insane art, it's kind of an insane card in my opinion.
This is to take off of what Tim wrote in their show notes. This is filthy.
Yeah, it's all kinds of filthy. Like look, even the pyramid in the background is popping its top. Guys, Jesus,
no, it's filthy like FILF.
Oh God, okay.
The F stands for frog.
I mean, who am I kidding? Like, you size it up a little bit more on top, and I'm probably on board. All right, so
I think that's what they call down bad.
Down bad, yeah. I'm down bad for the frog. Hey, man, in the dark. Anyway,